How's our lights on? Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I'm gonna do like our pastor. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, and this is going to be our workshop on three things. We're starting out with the transparency, what's the second one? The board auditor, and then the board attorney. Okay. And I will turn it over gladly to Denise and Cindy.
So good afternoon, board members, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Dodig. We appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. Our discussion, as Mrs. Gittens just outlined, is threefold. And so we know we're going to be talking about the concept of transparency in the context of working as a governance team. We will move toward a continued discussion on the internal auditor as required by Florida statutes. And then we will also have a conversation about the board attorney position and some direction that we will need as staff, Dr. Atkins and all of us, so we can make that happen. As we know, that position has become available, and so we want to talk about that. And then we will have good of the order, and then we will call it an afternoon. We know the students are very excited today. Today's the last day of school before spring break, and so yay! So all of us can go celebrate with them at that point. Right. So I do want to draw your attention to one other item. You should have a yellow card right in front of your name tag, and that is those are meeting norms that we agreed upon a couple of meetings ago when we were meeting in the Cluse-Hatchie room, and so we'll just continue to use those today if that's all right. As you can see, we have a very full agenda, and I think that will help us keep the work moving forward. So any questions about the norms or our agenda for today? Ms. McClung, we're also going to, if you can walk up there real quickly, we're going to put a bin or a parking lot up. I meant to do that before the meeting started. What we want to do with a bin or a parking lot is if there are items that come up that are in addition to the topics today, good practice talks about putting those items in a bin or a parking lot, and then when we talk about good to the order, you can talk about when you might want to readdress those items. So if there's other topic that comes up beyond the three we will talk about today, we always want to have a bin in place for that to occur. So we'll talk more about that under good of the order. So now we're really ready to dive into the first topic, and as a result of our conversation relative to transparency, our conversation today will yield two items. One, we will work toward a working definition of transparency within the context of our work as a governance team. And we will also, as a result of this discussion in this segment, have come up with a list of governance team actions that are in alignment with that shared definition. So those are our two outcomes for this next segment of work. So as we start the conversation here today about transparency, I think it's always good to start with the dictionary. What is transparency? What's Cambridge say? What does Merriam-Webster say? And so if you take a look at this definition, we'll start with the dictionary definition. You can read it just for a moment. Let's take a moment and do that. And then for your consideration, Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition. And then as we start to look at, in the context of government and business, I'll share a few of those as well. So here's transparency from the context of government. And then here we go from the context of business. And then one more look at it, kind of in a graphic form. So it has to do with the open, honest conversation, making things relevant, making things visible, that clear communication, no hidden agendas, all of that as you continue to read all of the definitions. When you look for themes that carry through, that's essentially what we're talking about here. And so really what we'd like to do, we know you all did your homework, so you've probably had a few minutes to look at the definitions. We'd like for you to start thinking about In this context, in the work together, superintendent, board attorney, and our board members, in our work as a governance team, what is transparency? So we're going to try to come up today with a working definition of transparency. And so here's how we thought we might work. So you are seated in teams. Our apologies for the arranged seating, but you know what we do. So we do have 3 teams. So our 3 teams here, starting with Mr. Dodig at this table, and then Dr. Atkins at this table, and then Ms. Giovanelli at this table. What we will do is we're going to pass out some paper to you, chart paper. You do have some markers. We'd like you to have a conversation about your notion of transparency as it relates to the governance team. And we're going to ask each team to develop a working definition. We're going to have a conversation at our tables and come up with that. And then we'll do an activity next that helps us pull it all together so we have a shared definition. So your job right now is to start thinking about a working definition of transparency for this governance team.
Denise, if I could just chime in, I have a little bit of a sunshine concern.
Please.
We really can't have private conversations.
Okay.
So I don't know how we want to do that.
Okay, so in a workshop, they're not able to work in teams. Okay.
No.
All right. So why don't we do this? Why don't you, there should be some sticky notes in your baskets. So if you'll please reach in and grab one. And I'll ask for you to write down your working definition of transparency. Let's take a few moments and do that.
Okay. Chris, any more?
We do, please.
So we can get
Need
those.
sticky notes? More?
Oh, you got enough?
We're good. Yeah.
So just pass it.
Now, I was going to take key words out of each of these first.
Definitions that we just talked about. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Cindy. What did you say? What do you want us to do?
These are just the definitions that you can refer to as you're writing your own.
Thank you.
There's some keywords you need to.
Oh, we're just putting words, right?
Just underlining words, but I'm done.
Just come up with your working definition.
I know what
I'm done.
Underline.
Okay.
Can we make comments?
So we're going to give everybody just a moment to finish, and then we'll pull together. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because it kind of, never mind, I'll say it later.
We'll have time for some discussion, but we're going to give everybody just a moment to finish their independent thought. Okay, so it looks like just about everybody's finished. So what we're going to do, Cindy and I will come and collect those, and we're going to put them up on the chart. We're going to sort them by similar ideas, and then we are going to have some conversation about the concept. Our stickies on them.
I haven't written mine down,
Okay.
but I will.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Is it supposed to be one or more?
I'm just going to group them by length.
It's a great color on you, Leah. Yeah.
I guess like any of jewel tones are not just hair that has no color.
No, yeah, but I like your
I put a little rinse in it. It's just, it's white. My son used to say.
Yellow, because I kept the yellow.
No, I like the color. I like your color a lot. I'm trying to figure out how do I go gray? Like, how do I do that?
Well, it was easy for me because I always was blonde.
Yeah, it's either or not really. Not really now.
Your hair is gorgeous though. You have so much hair.
Yeah, well, I can't really read that.
Okay, so what Cindy and I did was we just started pulling the concepts together in terms of being similar. So what were the similarities that you all came up with? And so when we talk about transparency, there was a lot of support around open, honest conversation, making sure facts are out there and available and open and accessible to others. We had a note about the conversation the other night about televising and broadcasting the advisory meetings, which we know was a directive from the board, so that's going to be a component of that. And that may actually tie into the next activity, which I'll talk with you about in just a moment. Again, clear communication, making sure that we're abundantly clear in what we're conveying, sharing relevant information, and then there was something also about public access, that if I need to get information, that I'm able to do that. There were two cards that talked about making sure that we check for understanding. So when you talk about terms like transparency, I think one of the reasons why we're having this conversation today is because there may be a variety of definitions, right? If you go around the table and we had everybody say what is transparency, we would hear some similarities, but we'd also hear maybe some nuances of difference. And so that concept of making sure that we're clear, that we check for understanding, and if there's a question, we go back and we verify with that person, so we make sure we're abundantly clear in that, okay? Ms. Vaughn, you wanted to add something?
Okay, well, the reason I don't have a Post-it up there is because, in my view, we have two transparency issues that we're really talking about. I think the one that perhaps brought us here is internal transparency. In other words, within the organization. However, the other part is transparency, us as a school district to the public. And so I believe that there are commonalities. However, for instance, for me, I just highlighted words. I would put something like government's, the one where it says government's obligation to share with the citizens and hold officials accountable. I would say the accountability goes on the side of us to the public.
Right, like an external transparency is what you're talking about.
And so that's why I didn't put anything up there, because I really see two distinct, now they're overlapping, openness, that sort of thing, but I think they're slightly different words with the accountability that we owe the public versus what we owe each other as a governance team. And I think they're slightly different, so that's why I don't have a Post-it up there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that is a key point. Other thoughts on the notion of that internal and external transparency comment? Any other thoughts from the governance team? Yes, ma'am.
My thing would, I agree, that's a good way to put it. Excuse me, but I feel that if the internal piece is not working, then the external piece is going to suffer.
Yes.
All right.
May also come under the next part.
Yes, and so we are going to do another activity, and we'll revise this a little bit based on the advice of council. But the next activity we're going to do is going to be, what does it sound like? What does it look like? What are those actions we take? And so that may get to some of that. More comments, additional comments about the notion of having an internal definition and an external definition, or do we see those as similar enough where we don't need to have multiple definitions? Just want to hear some more thoughts from the team on that.
I don't believe we need to have two definitions. I think that one's sufficient enough. We
Okay.
just need to make it clear what that is.
Okay. Others? Yes.
So I just underlined a few words from some of the definitions that you handed us, and some of the key words are openness, trust, and I think that goes to what Betsy was referring to as internal transparency, visibility, accessibility, obligation to share information, which for that we would be held accountable, and then the availability of information for collaboration and decision-making. So those were the words that stuck out to me, and I think are pertinent to either internal or external visibility.
Okay. Other comments? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on the external one. There is a slight difference in that there are things that internally we can share that externally, there's time factors, there's legal factors, there's those types of things. So I think the way of doing it can be the same, but some of the content will be different.
Yeah. A lot of that is dictated through policy or state law or what have you, correct? Okay. So to the extent that we can share information, we want to share information, right? Yes, ma'am.
It's the form of that sharing that causes me some concern. So we have, in this country, a constitutional republic which embodies a representative democracy, and it is incumbent upon us to understand every decision we make at the table and to be able to answer questions should the public pose those questions to us. I don't think it's incumbent upon us to share every detail from the dais, because we've been entrusted to exercise our judgment with the input of our constituents, but I don't think it's necessary for us to share every detail. And I feel us going down that road, and I'm finding it incredibly difficult to work as we go down that road.
So as we, and to that point, as we start to move into that next activity, I think that's going to become very apparent, and that's going to force that conversation of when we are transparent, when we're open, when we're honest in our communication, when we are providing access to appropriate information, when we're clear in our communication. What are some of the others?
This one, doing our jobs, letting the superintendent do his.
Right.
So making sure what's what.
So clear delineation of roles and allowing the roles to happen in terms of how they are supposed to happen. The concept of trust, I think that plays a role, and somebody mentioned the word trust, and I think that's a big part of it. When you think about transparency, I'm having a conversation with you, and I trust that it will remain as such. If there's information that needs to be more confidential, that will be held in confidentiality based on statute or whatever. If there's no need to, then fine. If the law allows for it to be shared, then it's able to be shared. Okay. Other comments about transparency? Anything else, Cindy, up there that we missed? And then I want to go back to any other comments.
Adhering to a common, I think it's common plan, or maybe it's the
Communication.
Communication plan. Oh, thank you.
I didn't know anybody was going to have to read it except me, so.
Adhere to a communication plan, so which should be policy. So your
Okay.
procedures that are in your manual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, ma'am.
The only thing I was going to say is kind of what you were pointing out. We need to have this stuff available. There's no way in the world we could tell or share every single detail. It would take us our lifetime to do something like that. But making sure that we have that available for and accessible for those who would want to have that is being transparent.
Okay. So availability of appropriate information, and to the point of when we can share, we will, and when we can't, there's reason why we can't, and that's understood because there is the trust that we are doing our work as public officials, and if we don't share some information, it may be relative to something that legally is not permissible at this time. Okay? I see a couple of hands, so let's go Ms. Gittens, then Ms. Fisher, and then back to Ms. Patrica.
The question that comes to my mind is that, excuse me, at one of the board meetings, and something came up, and I asked a question, and I was told it's on the website. And I guess the fine line to me is that considered in some of our minds transparency, that it's there? Because, and then to me, I asked the question when I was told that, so are we expected to read, you know, all 5,000 pages of the website and hope something comes out of it? That is kind of, you know, when you say transparency, it's there, but does there differ in different people's minds?
Okay.
And how we acquire that?
Okay, so that may go to, right, so when we start to move into what it looks like and what it sounds like, then we'll work on some of those sentence stems or some of those examples of what that may look like. So for example, if I ask X, then, you know, I'm entitled to, or not entitled, wrong word, I would expect answer Y. Okay, so Ms. Fisher, and then back to Mrs. Patrica.
So my comment was a little bit along those lines. In this day and age where social media is such a big part of our conduction of business, it's my understanding that relevant information regarding budget, advisory boards, and those kinds of things that the public might be looking for are on the website and can be accessed. And if people don't know exactly where to look, you know, they can ask. And I think that with the amount of information that we have, it's hard to anticipate, you know, that what people would ask for. But I've been able to come to the understanding that the information is there after several years of asking questions or being asked questions by my constituents, that if you just ask, the answers are there. And so I don't know how we determine if we get a level of satisfaction with the information that is available, or if we're looking for more, and if we are, how do we define that?
I have an answer to what I was saying, but Ms. Patrica was next.
So let's go there, and then we'll come back to Ms. Gittens.
Okay, so I need to have a level of comfort that while something might not be confidential, we respect each other's ideas before they're brought to the table. So for instance, I sent out an email many, many months ago about discussing qualifications for specific advisory committee members to be discussed at our next workshop. And before I got to the next workshop, that had been shared with the public. And I walk into a workshop not knowing what anybody's perspective is on an issue, and I'd like to have that conversation with you, figure out where we stand before we go out to the public and get feedback on that. So I feel it very difficult to trust when information is shared before we've even had a chance to discuss it, because you are the people that I have to make decisions with, and so I need your feedback. You know what? That idea could have been as crazy as the day is long, and you guys could have said, Chris, you're barking up the wrong tree, we're not even going to go there. Well, that's fine, then I'm not going to seek public input. But if we decide as a board that that's something we want to pursue, then I'm going to go get public input, because you guys are going to give me ideas I'm not already thinking about. So I have difficulty trusting when I put information out to you and I see it on social media.
So again, just emphasizing that open, honest, truth, you know, keeping the trust, all of that is very essential, and ensuring, and I think you're getting to that working definition of what is the expectation when we work together as a team, and really it's the trust, it's relationship that really is at the heart of the matter. and also going back to the other concepts that we've spoken about, making sure that we can have that open and honest conversation, and making sure that when the time is right, that it is coming here and that we are having open and honest and frank conversation. Okay. So here's what I think we're moving toward. Ms. Gittens, that's right, you were gonna make one more comment, and then I wanna move toward our next activity, which I think we're getting there already, so,
Okay.
which is good. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of in reference to what both of them said, my example is a couple of meetings ago when the information came up about Gibson doing the audit, and that when Ms. Patrica brought it up, she brought it up in the frame that it had already been discussed with the Finance Committee. And when I asked the question, well, how were we to know that? And the answer was, well, the previous board had already approved it. That's an issue for me, because just like you just said, before it goes to anyone else, it should come to the board. So if it's something that was previously approved that's going to be done now, I think transparency would be to say, the previous board approved this, and at the next Finance Committee, I'm going to bring this up again. It's kind of that pathway, because not knowing until I was sitting on the dais that the previous board had already approved it, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, you talked to the advisory board before you talked to us. And then it was explained. If we were more transparent about it, I think that issue would not have been an issue.
So your request is more background information in advance of a comment or of something brought forward?
And I agree everything is on the website, basically, that we need to know, some is not. But if we knew that that specific thing is coming up and you can check it out on the website or something, I don't know how we would go about doing that, but to give a heads up.
Okay, so that is a perfect entree into our next activity. So let's go ahead and move to that. And what we're going to ask you to do now is work with us. Put that over here. So what we're going to ask you to do now is to work with us on an activity that is, what does transparency, in light of the conversation we've talked about, so in light of the fact that we know there has to be trust, that there's openness, that there's honest conversation, even if it's hard conversation, that we know we want things to be accessible to not only the public but to us in terms of information as a governance team, absent anything that would not be appropriate to share outside in the public. Having visibility and accessibility, that level of accountability that Mrs. Vaughn brought up in terms of external customers. So what we'd like to do is, what does it look like? So when you see transparency in action in light of everything we've talked about, what does it look like at the board table and with our interactions together?
Sorry, but before we move on, I
Yes,
feel like
please.
we didn't hear from a member of the governance team, as I point to Dr. Atkins, on the definition piece.
Yes,
So
thank you.
can I
Please.
beg your thoughts?
Well,
Sorry, but you're a member of the team, like it or not.
yeah, I understand. I understand. And I liked, when I look at these definitions, I like the first definition in terms of, that was provided. That's the way I think of transparency, is if government is conducting activities, in a manner that's open and transparent, and, there are no secrets, that people feel that we're dealing with the public trust in a fair and equitable manner. I mean, that's what I think that, so I think that from my perspective, it's where I would like to get today is a mutual understanding of what that is, so that I, as a staff member, and our staff understands what the board's expectation is. Because I think, one thing, and I'm guilty of this, I think I didn't really anticipate the expectation around that changes. with a new board. I should have. You know, this is the third board that I've worked with. But, so it's not an intention to lack transparency. It's a changing an expectation and making adjustments to what that expectation is. And then I think we have to consider the logistics behind the expectation. You know, I've talked to superintendents that have had literally staff assigned to help the board with communication back and forth. And that's to meet that board's expectation around transparency. So, you know, that's what where I'm hoping that we would get.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Any other comments, Mrs. Vaughn?
Oh,
Please.
oh, okay. In response to what Dr. Atkins said, I think it's a good example of the difference between internal and external. Because internal, we are governed by sunshine. And so when an issue or a problem or whatever comes up, we rely on Dr. Atkins to fairly, as best as possible, give all of us the same information, okay? As close as possible, that we all get the information in a timely way. Okay, externally, the public is not dealing with that. The public has the website. The public has the YouTube videos. So everything is coming to them in a uniform way. But the thing that bothers me the most about, if I say lack of transparency internally, is that, and I think Dr. Atkins has been working on this, that there have been instances in the past where other board members, come to find out afterward, have known about something from, let's say, the Friday before, and I meet with him on a Wednesday. So that's a big lapse in time, and, you know, it's just human nature that, because I know I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes we get off on a tangent, but do you understand what I'm saying? The uniformity, the timeliness, and the fact that we operate under the sunshine, so it's not like we can all discuss it among ourselves, that's way different from the uniformity of YouTube, website information, etc., that goes to the public. So that's why in my head, even though there are commonalities of words, if we're looking at how it looks, it operates really, really differently.
So there could be that definition of transparency that we all agree on, and then in addition, externally, we commit to X, Y, and Z. That could be another possibility too, because you're emphasizing that there are some commonalities, but there are indeed some differences, right?
Yes.
So we may want to explain that as part of our definition. Okay, we'll just continue to go around. So Dr. Atkins, and then Mrs. Jordan, and then Mrs. Fisher.
Well, and the other struggle with making sure that every board member gets information in a timely manner, you know, something about our own, and this I'm talking about district staff, that we are going to go to work on, is sometimes we're finding that information is shared in a meeting, as we just recently experienced, that I'm planning to share with the board, like in an executive session, that somebody decides to share out and another board member hears about it. So that is something that we've also seen happen repeatedly, right, where we internally have our own, you know, because I have to be able to have a meeting with staff, talk about what the business of the district, and then talk about how do we communicate this with the board and do it in a uniform manner so all board members get the same information. And we have had some difficulty here of late of somebody sharing information out, board member receiving information before all the other board members and the superintendent. because I'm supposed to be the person that shares that with the board. So that's internal communication. I've actually asked, I think I've mentioned it to you, but Lauren and some of my internal team to work on a better system so we can get that information to you. But also, we're gonna have to look at our
internal process. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Well,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted to say, and I appreciate what you were saying too, Betsy, but what I see that happens sometimes is that a lot of times Dr. Atkins will share with each of us on our one-on-one. So our dates are different. So it varies and that gives us the opportunity to ask questions of what he is telling us instead of him shooting us an email, all of us a separate email and informing us, because then we don't have that opportunity to speak to him at that moment. And just like when Lauren, if something's something comes up, they send it to us immediately. So we have that. So I don't know how that, I know that I've seen you try to run around and get us all the other day when you wanted to share something with each one of us. And so I don't know how that happens.
So the process may need to be flexed a little bit based on the urgency of the situation or the timeliness. Mrs. Vaughn was talking about being timely in the communication, but also deferring to the superintendent when he makes a judgment about this is time sensitive or this is going to be a hot button issue. I need to get this out to the board in that uniform, timely fashion, whereas there may be some more procedural types of things or what's coming next that may not be a hot button item, or it might not have the urgency assigned, and so then that is deferred to your one-on-ones. So that may be a conversation you want to have, and then that's going to, what does it look like, right? Always.
You nailed what I was thinking, hot button issues, not just run-of-the-mill things that we need to know, but certainly on a hot button issue, if somebody's, and it's happened in the past, if somebody learns something on a Friday, but my meeting's not till Wednesday, and it could be just I learn it on Wednesday and they learn it on Monday, that's not right, and that's not transparent. That's what I'm meaning, just what Dr. Carlin said.
Okay, all right. So any other comments? And Mrs. Fisher, you were next.
Okay, so I think backing up to the board, when we are 7 individuals plus the superintendent, so we have different expectations, and so I think we need to come up with a common expectation. And as we individually all gather our information, I think we need to cement our understanding that as far as having the discussion and doing the business and making decisions, that does not happen, unless we are seated as a team. And I think that's where we're a little bit off track, is that I think we need, human nature. Somebody mentioned human nature, and I had written that down. Human nature being what it is. I mean, people get busy, they forget things, some people are not available. So I think we need to be patient enough to know that when there's a situation that is of significant importance, that we'll get the information as soon as possible, but that we won't do anything with it until we are seated as a team, because we can't be doing business individually. And I really feel like that is a part of the problem for us at this point in time.
Okay. So Cindy is writing furiously, so we're going to give her just a second to pick that up. No, it's good. This is good conversation. Absolutely. Okay, so now we're starting to dive a little deeper here. We're starting to get to some of these issues. So let's talk. Any other comments about this? What does transparency look like? Thinking about your work together and using examples is a good thing. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of piggybacking on what Ms. Fisher said and giving an example. At our Tuesday meeting, we discussed and we agreed regarding the letter situation. And we sat on the dais and agreed that the attorney was going to follow through and get back to us with information. And it was really a surprise to me, and kind of attacking my trust that there was an article that was out there about it. Now, I've been approached many times about things that we've talked about, and my answer is generally when the board has come to a conclusion and I'm able to discuss that, then I will. I think that that's one of the things we need to decide as our way of work. If something is in the hopper right now and we have not decided it, but our next step has been to wait to get information, then my suggestion would be to say to press or to whomever, when we have come to a decision, then you'll be the first to know. That to me was a break in trust. So.
All right, other comments, other discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Just that because we operate in the sunshine, when we are at a board meeting, or even now today, the press is here, and I don't know that we can tell them when to report.
No, but we can either make
Because what was
comments or
quoted
not make
was already spoken at the table. Yeah.
Part of transparency is talking about what we're talking about. I got a text from Gwen asking me if I had spoken with Tyree about that issue, and my answer is yes. I did answer his questions. This was a conversation or a protocol that we had with the previous board where the board agreed to speak through the chair, and then that protocol was removed. So, so it's my understanding that as we sit here operating today, there's no issue with us speaking to the press when they call us and ask for our individual comments. So that's, when he called me, I was like, all right, well, we don't have a protocol preventing me from, not that a protocol prevents me from doing anything, but in the spirit of getting along as a team, I try to follow our protocols, right? Am I?
Yes, and I think what
Expressing-
was said in the press was already said at the table that evening.
Okay.
My question on
Please go
that
ahead.
then, okay, if it was something, again, from the previous board, that's really a stumbling block for me.
But it was, no, what I'm saying, I'm
No,
giving
no,
you
let me-
context.
Can I finish
Yes,
my
you can
statement?
finish.
though? What I'm saying is to say the previous board was doing it, and then that went away. When did it go away? Who decided that? Was it presented to the present board to make that decision or not as to how we would do that? Is that what's going to come out of here today? What we're going to do? Are we going to go back to what the previous board said? It's one of those things that was out there that is on the website, so to speak, and we were supposed to know it, but
So let me,
needs to make
okay,
a
so let me ask a
decision.
clarifying question, and then we'll go back to Ms. Patrica. So my question to you is, we had listed, as Mrs. Fisher had talked about, and we want to hear from you, that we want to make sure we're making those decisions. We want to make sure, as we're seated as a team, we want to make sure that we're communicating those hot button issues. We want to make sure we've got a process for discussions with the media. So if that is your desire, then my suggestion is that we look at our protocols and start to incorporate part of our, or all of our discussion today. One of the reasons we're doing this activity is, what does it look like? So it's one thing to have a definition, but it's another thing to talk about how do your actions align with that definition, and that's what protocols are about. So there may need to be, I'm just going to make a facilitator's recommendation here, there may need to be some flexing of protocols based on today's conversation. So I just throw that out to you if that's the desire of the board, just for your consideration. Okay? Other comments or questions, Mrs. Patrica?
Yeah, so I hear you, Gwen. I hear you. I understand what you're saying, but I need from you a level of acceptance of the fact that previous boards, not just the previous board, but previous boards, have made multi-year decisions to include Vision 2020 and Envision 2030. And I can't know, and I've said this to you before, I can't know what you don't know. And I need you to exercise some patience with me, please, because I'm not trying to keep anything from you. I'm not trying to say the previous board did things the right way, this board's not. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying is, when you say there's a lack of transparency here, that comes across to me as an accusation. And I am not trying. I know you're laughing, but I'm giving you perspective on how it hits me when you say that.
Okay.
It hits me as an accusation that I'm trying to keep something from you. I'm not trying to keep anything from you. But at the same time, there is a learning curve associated with the roles that we're in, and I'm still on that learning curve. There are decisions that were made by boards previous to the one that I'm on that I'm learning about today, 2.5 years into this position. So I don't know I don't know what you need to know. And until we get there, until we cross an issue where you're like, oh, I didn't know that was going on, then we'll have that discussion. But how like, what's the solution?
And I am not laughing. I agree with you. That's why we're here today, is to come to that conclusion, to say, okay, where do we start with this and where do we do that? Another example, though, Chris, was this morning in your presentation at BUPAC. It was offensive to me when they were asking you why so many people are leaving, and your answer referred back to the fact of the new board. That's offensive. And to me, it's like my family, if my son were still living at home and me and my husband have a pile of dirty laundry, and my son runs out down the street, we got dirty laundry everywhere. But what he didn't say is the washing machine broke last week, we're getting it fixed tomorrow, and there won't be dirty laundry in a couple of days. If we're going to be a team, we have to either perceived or whatever, say things that can be perceived negative about any one of us here. And that was offensive. So I don't know how we can fix it at this point. And I know when everyone is out in the community, we're all individuals. But somehow we have to, like I said with the superintendent, pinky swear or something, that we will put forth our best foot forward. I have said over and over again that in the community, if they see us storming, and if we continue to say we're storming, we're storming, we're storming, they take that on, and storming to them means we are not doing what we have to do because we're too busy storming. A better representation would be, we have gone through the stages. There's a bit still more of storming, but we're working on it. We are moving forward, and we are doing things to help us move forward. We've got to have some type of a unified front that we are working on this, or otherwise we're dead to the community.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Fisher?
Okay, I'm going to step out here. The most important thing that I have learned since I've gotten on the board is that I had to get over myself. I had to put my own personal agendas and the things that I thought that I could do aside. I have to leave that I put them in a little bag and I leave them outside the door when I come in here and when I'm out in the public too, because it's not about me and it's not about my feelings, because if you take everything personally, you're missing the boat. And I'm not looking at you, Gwen, and say you, but all of us. I'm just giving you my experience. And so in order to be a working member of this team, you really have to forget about your own feelings. And I'm just speaking from experience. And someday when I'm not on the board anymore, I'll tell you about some of those experiences. But it's not always pleasant, and sometimes it is offensive, but all I can say is...
So is it personal when I say offensive? Is that how you...
Yeah, that is how I perceive it when I hear it, yeah.
Okay,
And again, human nature, we all have different perceptions. The superintendent can tell all 7 of us the same thing, and we might all have a different perception about it. We might hear it and feel it differently, and until we get to the table and can work through it together as a team member, not necessarily as an individual, we're just not going to accomplish what we need to accomplish, and there's so much work to be done.
Okay. So what I'd like to do, so thank you for the honest and open conversation, because that certainly helps us as we move forward as a team. And I know that that has been some work we've committed to as a governance team, is to continue to work on the development of team, to team build and that type of work. So that does move us toward being able to implement our definition of transparency. When we think about building trust, having open and honest communication, that will get us there. What I'd like to do is direct us back to the activity and talk about transparency. So we've talked about internal, we've talked about uniformity of information, timeliness, how we're going to communicate, and especially when there are hot button issues. We've talked about, as a board, making sure we have that common expectation, as Dr. Atkins asserted on definition 1, that it's that open nature of business and financial activities, making sure that people are being treated fairly and honestly and openly. We're making decisions and taking action only when we're seated together as a team, and we are going to work on a process for discussions with the media. What are other actions we're taking to demonstrate transparency as a governance team? Yes, sir.
This is going to be a different
Okay, please.
flip on it, okay? One of the things that we have to also consider is efficient operation of the school district. And Mr. Martin really drilled it in my head that one of the things that I have to do as superintendent is protect the interest of the district. And, at times, work has to be done, and then, once it's done, then the communication goes out. But where the struggle sometimes comes in is as we're trying to communicate to people rapidly, then that stuff goes out before we're done with whatever we're doing. Like, let's say we're making a hire. That's a real good example. We're making a hire, and we're going through the process of making a hire, but then boom, 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 all these rumors go out there, and then questions come in, and we're still in the process of doing the vetting and all of those type of things. That takes away from the work. There has to be some degree of confidential work, or work that goes on, maybe not so much always confidential, but work that goes on and allowed to go on until it gets to the point where we have a recommendation that we carry forward. And I use the employment, but there are other examples that are out there. So it's that fine line between when do you communicate out to the board about A, what's going on, and B,
manageability.
Manageability
right,
of it while you're
yes.
trying to get the work done. And so, and then the other piece of it is, sometimes these things that we communicate out start to generate a lot of other public questions that cause us to go down rabbit holes at some time and expend a lot of district resources. And that's another piece that's where he talked about the protecting of the district, because if you throw something out there and then all of a sudden you're to communicate, and then you get, based on that piece of communication, you get pulled down another avenue, that's becomes very inefficient as well. So there's a balance here that we have to, I think, consider in this conversation.
Yes. Okay, so I want to keep us focused on that conversation for just a moment. Ms. Vaughn, I want to get to you, so maybe jot down your note. So based on what the superintendent just talked about, using an example of a hire, let's talk about that as a board for a moment. So we have an example where we're considering a person or 2 or 3 for a position, okay? At what point, or any comments you have relative to at what point do you want to be communicated with relative to that as a board? I'd like to hear some comments about that. What's your perception? We'll start with Ms. Vaughn. We'll move over to Ms. Patrica.
Well, Dr. Atkins and I have talked several times. It's almost become a maybe not so funny joke about the grapevine. And I guarantee that information that I have found out prior to did not come from a fellow board member. It came from staff.
Okay.
And so as we're having this, probably there have been things that came out of the board that maybe shouldn't have been, but I guarantee there is many things or more that come from staff, and it goes staff to the outside grapevine, and too many times, I've had people call me and say, well, I hear so-and-so is being considered or being brought back or has already been hired. And I'm like, what? I don't know. And so when we have this conversation, I don't want the general public to misconstrue that it's all of us and we're all breaking the sunshine. It's coming out of staff often.
And I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I don't disagree with that whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think I heard Dr. Atkins before address that and allude to the fact that he is committed to doing some work around that as well.
I think part of what I would say is that, my experience in the public sector has taught me that you can never stop all of that stuff. So I think part of what our role would be as a governance team is understanding that sometimes there are going to be staff-to-staff talks, like even, I think, secretaries that set up certain meetings and see things going on, talking to each other, and then that gets out, and there's where things go out that aren't even accurate. That's the other thing, is a lot of times board members get information that has been leaked out from staff that's not accurate, or you've got something that we're working on, and somebody jumps to conclusion about that work, like we're going to hire this person, and then we're fighting the rumor mill. So it's just, I think that we also have to understand, as we work in the public, that we're going to be dealing with rumors, and maybe one of the things that we can discuss as a team is how do we want to handle that. So, because I understand, it's not fair on a board member to be out there and get hit with a major rumor about like a position like a chief. That's a big deal. There are some superintendents that say, look, my staff is my business. I understand that big hires are board business. I get that, and I endeavor to get you the most accurate information. But there's that stuff that goes on that I think we have to maybe figure out a way. How do you handle rumor control effectively, so that you have the information you need, and we're able to do what we need to do.
Yeah. And some of that comes from that understanding we were talking about before. When we acknowledge that's going to happen, then is there some grace that's also given? Let's just talk about that for just a moment. So think about that. Ms. Patrica, and then we're going to go to Ms. Giovanelli.
I really appreciate what you just said. That was very enlightening, gave me some insight into your thought processes. I really do appreciate it. I can tell you that personally, the way I deal with those rumors, the rumor mill, is I say, no recommendation has come forward from the superintendent. I don't feel comfortable talking about it until I have a recommendation from the superintendent. When it comes to hiring, we don't hire. We hire and evaluate the superintendent and the board attorney, and the next part of this workshop will determine whether we have a third employee. That's it. So unless and until a recommendation comes forward from you on the agenda, I'm not talking about it. It's just not, because I don't know it to be true, and I don't deal in rumor and innuendo, and that's a lot of what comes my way. So, even if we have a private conversation about where you're thinking about going, I don't know until the decision is made, nor do I make that decision. You make that decision, and then I either approve it or not based on very strict, specific statutory criteria. So that's how I deal with it.
Okay. All right, so we are running up against an hour for the conversation. So what I'd like to do is there anything else in terms of board actions, governance team actions that we need to talk about relative to transparency? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I think that we need to have a communication plan that's actually part of board policy. I think we need to better define the roles of school board member versus superintendent, and vow to stay within those roles, because I think that the transparency piece for me, in terms of internal transparency and trust amongst my colleagues, is my perception that people are stepping outside those roles quite frequently, and that's not a way of work that I can accept. Okay. So I need for us to come to an understanding of what the communication plan should be. We don't deal with staff. We don't work with staff. We go to the superintendent if we have an issue, and he will send us to staff if it's appropriate. Now, if he says, no, you can't go to Lauren today, or you can't go to Lauren now, Lauren might be working on 12 other things that are absolutely necessary for student outcomes. I'm not aware of that. It's not that he's trying to keep Lauren from me, and Lauren, I'm using you because you're here. It's that he knows the workload of his staff and I don't. So going directly to staff, in my estimation, is just never acceptable.
We just got that policy.
I know, but it's not a policy. Right now, it's a
Oh,
plan.
okay.
I'd like it adopted
see,
as
yeah.
directed.
It's a process, and so the advocacy is around
Okay.
putting it in policy.
There is a policy, if I could just.
Okay, please.
1.05, and I encourage you all to read it, clearly says, conduct with superintendent and staff, respect the authority of the superintendent for administration and management of the schools and district operations, refrain from directing school or district staff in the performance of their duties. So it is in board policy.
But I think the communication plan takes that a step further, fleshes that out more, and gives us more guidance, and allows us to hold each other accountable in the event that we step outside that policy.
Okay, so let me just clarify, and then we'll move on to another comment. So the fact that we have the statement that Mr. Dodo just made and the process now in a form, are you still advocating that it goes into policy, or, okay, all right, just want to be clear on that. Okay, we had a couple of hands, so we'll work our way through.
We haven't heard from Ms.
Giovanelli, and then we'll work back, yes.
Well, we're talking about action, but when I hear I call it gossip, that he knows it, so I just go right back to him, because I think he needs to know what's going on, that the gossip is going on, because that gossip usually goes into more of a conversation, and that's the people's perception, and that's part of the transparency that I feel the only way to stop it is to take it back to where it probably kind of started, and try to get a damage control on it. You know, that's how I feel. I think that, you know, and I don't try to engage. I just, you know, sometimes I'm in shock over what they're telling me, and then sometimes part of it's true. It's not, the gossip is partly true. And so, and then you're thinking, oh, there's no way, you know, and then you get back and, well, then you find out, well, maybe part of that is a little true. So I think it's got to bring it back home, you know. And
So that's an action. That's an
my
action that would support
I go
transparency.
right to him and I let him know
Okay.
what's going on, and that way he knows that he can handle it within his. I don't go back to what I heard and who or what. That's irrelevant. And so, or that, is this true? You're gonna be such and such tomorrow. I don't do any of that. First, sometimes I don't even know who they are, but you know. So I think that's really important.
So directing it back to the superintendent, right?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for that. Yes, ma'am.
And I was going to piggyback on that. That's the same thing that I do. Something came up just yesterday, and I called him and I said, okay, here's what I've heard. Tell me the truth and as to what is really going on. What's disconcerting sometimes is if you ask a question and then you're told, no, that's not happening, and a few days later it does, it just kind of hurts the trust.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, that's why I try to put the context around it, you know, because let's say if we're hiring person A, and we're in the middle of the hiring process, and you hear rumor that we're going to hire person A, then person A hasn't gotten an offer yet. And so yes, I think, you know, understand that, you know, if we're in the process, it's not done, but it could happen, you know, after a vetting process. Now, I would suggest that, you know, what you all have done, continue to do, you know, the rumor control, when you hear one, that's what I'm here to do. The second thing, and what I originally was going to react to, was just the communication plan. We did sit down with Mr. Williams, and he presented some policies in other districts, some of which we have in ours, some of which we don't, some of which is contained in our protocols, some of which is not. In addition to that, I talked a little bit about what our process is moving forward when it relates to board information requests. So a change that we've already implemented is we're logging those and communicating to all board members, you know, significant requests. You know, if somebody just answers a simple question, I'm not sending that necessarily out there. But most of what comes in, we put back out to all board members. So we've done that. And then a third part of the plan is kind of similar to the way I was communicating around when I did call around to everybody this week, is we want to plan to allow that quick response to happen in the event that we have a substantial event, you know, a major hire, a major media story, an audit, you know, issue. Like we did have another, you know, they asked for a little on the audit 3, since we're all here. They had one little piece of information, which turned out to be a big piece of information because it was contracts, so we're sending that back up. It's just a minor thing, I think, meaning that they just asked for a piece of document, but that's something that it would be nice just to be able to communicate that out real quick. But those type of things, so everybody gets the information that day. And the difficulty is when you set a meeting schedule, you know. So I think what we want to do, if we're working with Lauren and Linda Jo and other people within communications, is maybe be able to provide another person that also could hit that stuff really quickly, so you could get that call and then understand the context. Like when you called me yesterday, I'm able to talk about, well, here's what was said, here's where we are, you know, and I think that will be able to allow you to feel some confidence in what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
2 things, and I was thinking perhaps, you know, with technology, there would be some type of a clearinghouse, like some app or something that if you needed to get something out to us, that we could be a part of. I'm just throwing that out there as something that would make it easier than having a person to do it.
I think it's a sunshine issue, though. Could be a sunshine issue.
I mean, for the superintendent to send it out to all of us at once?
Disseminate information.
Oh, okay.
Like timely information, a hire, or
It's like sending out
something
an
went
email,
down in a
wouldn't it?
situation.
Yeah, as long as there's no conversation between board members regarding the information.
Him sending it to us, and maybe the app does not have the
An
ability
app.
for us
Oh,
to.
okay.
No, I'm just saying something for us that we,
I
anyway.
know that with the text, like Lauren does, it's already kind of like that. but-
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's
So,
the simple information. We're going to use a text.
okay.
We'll continue to do that. Sometimes these things are there's more context that needs to be conveyed. You know, it's situational, and you need to understand the situation. Like a hiring issue, or you know, or a major event, or stuff around an audit.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
that is, you know, requires more explanation
And-
sometimes.
And so as a facilitator, one thing that, again, I'm going to bring us back to a little bit of time, keep our focus on that because I want to be able to get you out of here on time, but also a comment deferring to the superintendent in the way in which that needs to be communicated. So we've talked about today hot button issues. We know that we've agreed that those need to go out in a timely fashion, allowing him the opportunity to get that out in the way that he sees as appropriate. And then the other issues that are just more procedural process, this is coming in the next month or so, or maybe in the next 2 weeks, that would continue to happen as part of your one-on-ones. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
The other thing I wanted to mention, the communication piece, the superintendent shared it with me, and I do have 2 points on there that are kind of concerning to me. There were one point that said if a board member has something that is deemed by the superintendent, in his opinion, that it's too much work or too much time,
Substantial, yes.
that he can deny it, and I have an issue with that. The other thing, and maybe it's that we use the other one instead, that says if it's substantial, but that's still your opinion that it's substantial, that we have to bring it before the board, and the board has to approve it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. The one that we have right now, if we put that one in there, which is work that's beyond an hour and a half,
90
it
minutes, yes,
goes to
that's
the board,
correct.
I'm fine, absolutely fine
So we
with
can
that.
substitute that in the protocol language, I believe, is what we would adopt in that one. Is that what you're advocating for?
Yeah, so we can take
Okay.
that, and, you know, what Mr. Williams did was he had taken several different board policies and had pulled from those and had put together, you know, that memo that I shared. And so based on that and feedback, plus our current protocols, plus the communication piece that I had discussed that Linda Jo had put together, plus what I want to put together with Lauren and Jen Schaefer and Linda Jo, that whole thing would be packaged and brought back to the board as a recommended changes in policies and protocols and a communication plan. So I really just have the one piece that I want to, that I'm still working on, because just getting that meeting set to hammer that out, and then we'll be done and ready to bring that forward.
Okay. Ms. Gittens, you said you had a couple of items.
No,
I want
that
to make
was
sure
the
we
second
address
one.
those. Okay. All right. Mrs.
Any
Patricia?
chance we can include a staff time estimate in the information that you send out to us? So if I ask a question about an agenda item and Linda Jo can tell me, or tell the board, it took 5 minutes or it took 50 minutes,
Or
I
the
think that will
log.
be
Is that-
enlightening to us as a board as to how much time we're demanding of staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's part of the email and then in the log
Yeah,
as well?
whatever
Okay.
reports you're going to provide
Okay.
to us. I mean, I know keeping track of your hours is a disaster, but or not a disaster, it's a pain in the butt. But if we could have a level of awareness as a board as to how much time we're demanding, I think that might be helpful to sort of self-police ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. Giovanelli?
So this is something I think you've just kind of started doing, and I like it, is when somebody's asked questions, then you share the information. But that just started happening, and that really hasn't been consistent. And I know when Chris started, she probably asked a lot more, got a lot more information, because you always seem to know more than me. It's not saying a whole lot, but for me, but I think that's important for people that are new, just to get the information in, because I would probably have learned a lot more if I had known your questions and saw the answers and got the information, the same information that you received, and it would have just, I think, helped me tremendously in the learning process, because I feel like that, yes, it's a learning process, but I'm just now really kind of grasping a lot more than I did 2 years ago. And so I just want to bring that, that's really important, and I really appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. I mean,
All board members.
I know.
it seems to be working real well, you know, communicating all that information out to all board members, so.
Yeah.
And then the other piece too, you know, staff is always available as well, and, you know, that's another piece where I know that's important for an educational board member. You know, they can sit down with you and take the time. But in the meantime, yes, we will absolutely continue.
Okay, so we are at 2:18, and I'm sorry to be the time police, but I want to make sure you get this conversation completed, and I don't want to cut anybody off, but I also want to recognize that we have 2 other items we need to get to. So other items that we need to talk about. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to an earlier comment that Chris made about what the previous, I guess, protocol for the board chair as far as media, or having one person as far as media. And I'm not saying that because it's me, but what I'm saying is that if we did have something similar to that, then that person would know that they are speaking for the rest of the group. I don't know how that would
No, I
work.
think Tyree, can't ask him for public comment, but I always say I am one of 7. You heard me say that repeatedly this morning. I always say I am one of 7. And I can see Ms. Fisher shaking her head because she was so against that protocol that we had. And ultimately, that protocol ended up not working for that board. I don't think it's appropriate for us to muzzle each other, so to speak. I think if Tyree calls and asks me a question, I think that I am an elected official who's free to answer that question from my perspective as one of 7.
Okay, other
And
thoughts on that,
I
please?
wasn't
Yes.
trying to muzzle anyone, so perhaps the verbiage that we would use for protocol would be, if it is something that we are working on and have not come to a conclusion, that all of us as elected officials would refrain from adding or detracting from any information in the community or the media until we have come to some type of a conclusion as a body.
Okay, so other thoughts on that?
I don't know.
Please. Yes, go ahead.
I don't think that we can stop one another from speaking if someone is,
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying like on issues that are alive and working that we have not done something with. If it's,
I think that we just have to use common sense when you are speaking about issues. Because the only thing that bothers me is the fact that they keep saying, since the new people got here, because we're not new anymore. We're here. We're part of this team, and we just have to move forward. But I think the common sense really needs to come into play when we are out there and we're speaking and just everything that we do.
Okay. I saw another hand over here. No?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm going to make this the last comment, please, Ms. Patrick.
I can think
Yes.
of nothing that frustrates the appearance of transparency more than having a board protocol that says we can't speak to the media. To me, that is
not what I said though. But I'm
that
sorry.
we can't speak to the media until an issue has been decided by the board as a body. I would think that that would be very frustrating. As a matter of fact, when we had that protocol in place, that was the frequent feedback that I got from the media, like, what the heck, you're elected, you can say whatever you want to say, why are you speaking through your chair? There was a high degree of frustration by the media when we had that protocol in place.
And I take that off the table of just going through the chair. Basically, I'm just talking about us sharing information. So you can take it off. It's all right.
As far as protocols being revisited, I will make a recommendation to the team, and I would like you to react to this. There may need to be some adjustment to your protocol based on some of the items you have discussed today. So I offer that to you. Is that something you would like to have in the bin and for us to start looking at any adjustments that might need to be made in light of what was talked about? Just would like to know from the board, yes, you would like us to have a look at the protocols, or absolutely not? Okay, so we'll put that in the bin for some protocol work and adjustment work to happen in accordance with the conversation today. Okay, thank you. So it is 2:23. We're going to move you forward into the internal auditor conversation. And so what I would like for you to do, if you would, is take a look in your backup. You should have board auditor questions for discussion. That's what we're going to move to next. And then also you should have in your backup the school board policy 1.17, which we will use as part of that conversation. You do have a copy of Florida statutes 1001.42 relative to direction for the internal auditor and statutory language. And then you also should have a copy of the job description that was created back in 2005. So we will keep those three handouts handy as we walk through the discussion relative to the internal auditor. Our goal today is, as a result of this conversation, to have a model, an employee, a firm, what have you, and a reporting structure relative to the position of auditor. And then we will also provide direction to the staff regarding those three documents that we just talked about, including a timeline for advertising, interviewing, negotiating, and hiring. So that's what we're working toward today. Okay, so if you'll please take a look, either electronically or if you printed it, the questions for discussion. Cindy's going to scribe, I believe, as we work through these questions. So let's start with number one. Is it the consensus of the board that the board should, similar to the school board attorney, hire an individual to fill the role of internal auditor in accordance with the law? So let's have some discussion about that. Yes, ma'am.
So I met with Bill Tubb and Paul Cohen, who's the chair of our Finance Advisory Committee, to pick their brains about this issue. And they brought forth what I think is a fantastic idea, which is hiring this work out to the Clerk of Court's office. Clerk of Court's office currently has an internal audit function. They actually provide the internal auditing work for the County Commission. And Linda Doggett's office, I think, is run fantastically well. There's never any controversy coming out of that office. There's never any question as to how the work is done. Her work is basically beyond reproach. I did speak with Linda to see if this is something that her office had the capacity to do, and she said that yes, she would be willing to hire the staff necessary to provide this function given that it was a long-term commitment, and I told her the statute requires sort of a 5-year plan, and so that obviously would be a 5-year commitment. I think it checks a lot of the boxes that we've talked about before with regard to audit, in the sense that it's a risk audit that would raise red flags of waste, fraud, or abuse anywhere in the district. And she already has on staff fraud detection agents who, if one of those red flags was raised, would then go in and do an investigation with regard to that red flag. And the other thing that I think is important as part of that plan is for this board to be audited, to see if there's a risk assessment that could be done here with regard to our policies, protocols, procedures, and that kind of thing. I think we need to set the example for the entire organization by starting with us. So she would charge us what her cost is. There would be no profit here for her. So I think it would also, not only would it be reliable and trustworthy, but it would also be efficient. And the last thing I'll say before I listen to everybody else is I've had conversations with Attorney Dodick about this, and the only potential downside, if his interpretation of the law is correct and mine is incorrect, I believe the word employee means contract with. He believes it means hire someone on staff. The only potential downside there is an audit finding. Like there's no negative there for the district, and if the Auditor General comes back to us and says you need somebody on staff, then we get somebody on staff. But if we have a good alternative solution, I would recommend that I would support going that route.
Okay, so we have a recommendation around clerk of courts, or an idea about clerk of courts being hired. Other thoughts along those lines, or additional thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I know I had read that previously with a previous board that it had been discussed and I guess approved to use the clerk of court. Not sure necessarily why that didn't happen. I understand that it is going to be more cost effective for us to do that. It sort of brings the question to my mind though, like you're saying, employee. How accessible? If I had mentioned before, my suggestion was to hire out as a firm.
Okay.
And my suggestion was a firm because just like Linda Doggett and the circuit of, the courts doing it, they have multiple people, but if there's various things, there's somebody there that can say, here's so-and-so, your expertise is this, so you do that. So if we would go the route of hiring an employee, I would say my suggestion would be a firm, because we do have access to a lot more information. We would have access to a singular person being our person. They may not sit in a cubicle here every day, but I think Ms. Jordan had mentioned too, what do they do all the rest of the time? If it's a firm, we'll build out whatever hours we need rather than having to do, hiring someone, so to speak. And then you mentioned about auditing our policies, and you had talked about that with Neola. Is that the same?
I don't think that's what
No,
this
it's different. I wasn't very clear. We would have, these would be employees dedicated to the internal audit function at the School District of Lee County, working in the Clerk of Court's office. So it would be the equivalent of a firm, minus the cost of a firm. It's basically the same function. It's just done by the Clerk of Court's office instead of hiring an individual firm. What I am suggesting is that we as a board subject ourselves to the same type of internal audit that we will be subjecting the rest of the district to.
Can someone that was here previously talk to why you didn't go with the Clerk of Court?
Dr. Atkins.
We actually, we did use the Clerk of Courts. We had a situation where we were doing a dental RFP, and we wanted to really do an internal investigation relative to that dental RFP. Clerk of Courts came in and conducted what I felt was a pretty thorough and fair audit. It was interesting to us. It found a lot of fault among the different different vendors that were involved. So the information at the end of the day was pretty helpful. And then beyond that, I mean, I think that those boards just didn't have another item that came up that they felt needed to be looked into. So we had that option there for a while, and then it just wasn't used. So
For no negative reasons.
yeah, no negative reasons. Like I said, they were very responsive because this was a big issue in the district. I mean, we ended up, the prior dental thing had gone actually into court, gone into a Department of Administrative hearings because we had a protest as to what happened. Was the superintendent pulled the bids, and the company that had won protested that.
Yes.
And it wound up going to Department of Administrative hearings. And so then we came back at it, kind of the same thing happened where you had all this publicity and about who was the winner. And so at that point, the board decided, you know what, we're going to audit this and see, because we're hearing all of this junk about this vendor and that vendor and the process and that was used by the district to do all this. And so the clerk of courts came in and did an audit and then presented that to the board. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, we'll go to Ms. Jordan and then to Ms. Swan.
Okay, is there a way to find out the definition of employee versus non-employee?
Yeah, well, and that's why there's a difference of opinion.
Versus an opinion, I mean, can we find out the actual?
But the
Mr.
definition
Dodig, yeah.
is subject to opinion.
Yes.
That's the problem with the law. So
jump in. Yes.
I read the staff report. The staff report specifically pointed out the districts that have internal audit employee, or have an internal audit, I should say, not an internal audit employee. One of those is Brevard, the other is Manatee, that hire out.
Yes, I think so, yes.
And then at the end,
But they still won't be required, Manatee.
right, because
Yeah,
they're under
not big enough.
500,000. So
Right.
Brevard is really the only one we're talking about here. At the end of the staff opinion, it said that Collier, Lee, and another county are gonna have to hire an internal auditor on staff, but it didn't say Brevard is gonna have to. And Brevard is currently contracting with an outside firm. So to me, that means employee means you can, but if you look up the legal definition of employee, it's have somebody on staff, or it's contract with, or employee has a lot of different meanings.
Mr. Dodig, thank you, Ms.
No, I think Ms. Patrica's assessment is correct. I think minds can disagree. The council for Brevard County, I will tell you, though, is of the opinion that employee means an internal employee. So she's having a little bit of this debate with her board. So I did seek out some additional information from the Council for the Superintendents Association, Ms. Frank, somewhat helpful. She did think that the intent, albeit still not necessarily completely clear, was that this was supposed to be an internal employee that oversees the financial aspects of the district, for whatever it's worth. However, I told you last meeting, I can certainly, and then believe, I can defend Ms. Patrica's position. So,
Okay, thank you.
and I told her this, and I'll share with all of you. I'm not here to be adamant about either position. I don't want to do that. So, especially,
sir.
I won't be here in a few months.
All right,
so.
appreciate that. Ms. Giovanelli and then Ms. Jordan.
So my question is,
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped you. Goodness,
Oh, go ahead.
excuse me.
Go ahead.
Mrs.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Go
am
ahead,
so
Betsy.
sorry. Go, Ms. Vaughn,
You were
please.
first, Ms. Vaughn.
But I was
Need
going
to write them down, sorry. Please do.
I personally like the idea of an employee here, and one of the reasons I'm saying that is because I'm looking at the statute, and I'm looking at the list of things that this employee shall do, and there's a really, really long list. I think that using an outside source, and I think that's in one of the questions, if there's more expertise, let's say, that needs to happen, then we should allow that person to contract out if necessary. But, you know, we're not only looking at potential red flags, or, we're not only looking at operational things, ongoing financial verification and reliability of records and things. These all, to me, need a person dedicated to doing these things all along.
Okay, so advocacy around an employee. Let's hear other conversation. Moving to Ms. Giovanelli.
So I like what you said, Chris. I like that, actually, the clerk. But my question would be, wouldn't we still need an employee here to work with them? So as the even liaison, I mean, I really would rather go to an individual here, or that person gives the same information to the board versus who would we take that direction from? Who would we get the information from? I don't think it should come back from the superintendent at that point. I think it should be our employee back. That's my opinion, because I think that's the purpose of this, is to keep it separate. So we still need an employee to work with the clerk's office. That's, I guess, my question, and not understanding what all entails the jobs or the position for doing that. I had looked up Palm Beach County. They have a whole team with an inspector general, and so I mean that was I had Susan get me the information, and that was it's a lot of information, and so I think that's extreme, but I'm just curious. I think maybe we use your idea, but I think we still need to have someone here overseeing that position, overseeing it, and that's just work.
So the employee, as well as the ability to work with the clerk's office.
Right.
As deemed
Yeah,
appropriate.
because I mean, that clerk's office has to come here and get the information. Who should be that person, that point person? It shouldn't be his staff.
Okay.
We need someone in-house to be getting the information, and they know where to go. And so they should have the expertise to be able to go to those departments and ask the proper questions and so forth. And I know they're not going to have, but I would hope that the clerk's office would be able to convey what is needed, and then they would be able to figure out where they need to go and what questions to get the information.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Jordan, then Ms. Gittens, and then Ms. Fisher. Yes, ma'am.
Well, just a couple of things really quick. One was, who would they answer to? And then when I brought it, the last time when we spoke about this, I was speaking about Escambia County. They do the same thing, but they have a whole group who actually work within the district. They have a charter, they have the whole 9 yards. But they also utilize some of the people, because some of the, because we already have a person who does some of the auditing for like the schools.
Internal auditor,
So
yes.
they utilize some of those people instead of pulling all these other different people in. So there's so many different ways for us to look at this. But I do think that we need to have, I think the purpose is to have a person who would be answering to the board.
So to have it at least, to have an employee.
Right.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move to Ms. Gittens and then back to Mrs. Fisher.
And I will revamp what I said prior as I'm listening. My suggestion would be an in-house employee that could contract out, but that contracting out would be the clerk's office, because that would save us money as well.
Okay.
And then the expertise would be there. They know what we need and so on. So.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So then, as I look at the statute, and I would ask Mr. Dodick to correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks to me like if we had an internal employee who was a point person, who incorporated what is already being done here, it's an ongoing financial verification, and it seems to me like the risk audit part of it is part of it, but there are some other issues like compliance and efficiency of operations that would be, I think, better handled under a person who was here on a daily basis and had that responsibility. And certainly, I would always be in favor and have voted before on this, that the clerk's office is a cost-effective and efficient and trustworthy person to contract with.
Okay, other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Are you looking at me? I can't.
Yes,
see it.
sorry.
Is that?
Mrs. Patrica.
It sounds
Put
like
your
that might
glasses
be the
on.
compromise. I did discuss with Linda Doggett the possibility of having that staff member that you guys are talking about bringing in-house on her staff, and that person would manage the schedule and make changes to the schedule and report to the board, and that person's staff would do the internal audit function for us. But if we have that person, if we hire that person and that person reports to us, then it sounds like that's the compromise that would work. Also, I heard from Dr. Adkins at our last meeting that he doesn't think it's appropriate for our existing internal audit department to serve any part of this role for us. It should be a separate person. We shouldn't have an employee that has one foot in the staff lane and one foot in reporting to the board. So it would have to be a new employee.
Okay, I would agree. Yep. Okay, Mrs.
So
Fisher.
however, that person would, part of that person's responsibility would be to oversee the operations that are happening, like, for instance, Mr. Brown with the school, in-school audits. I mean, that would be part of the information that that person would be monitoring. Am I correct about that?
I don't think that's what,
No?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it's a
Okay.
separate function. He may have to get
Yes.
information.
Because he shouldn't be reporting to that, our auditor, that he still should be reporting to him.
Correct.
And if he finds an issue, or his employee finds an issue, he's gonna tell him, who would then tell us, right? So, I mean,
So working in as partners,
I think
perhaps,
that-
if there's
if-
information needed. Okay.
if, when he needs information, he can then, how this protocol would be, go to him to get the information from, you know what I mean, from Mr. Brown, but just
Right.
like it would be from the Doggett's team as well, channeled that way. So, I mean, that's just my interpretation.
Okay. Ms. Fisher, you want to clarify, and then we'll move to Ms. Jordan?
If I could
Okay.
just clarify, because financial records and reports and safeguarding of assets, is that information regarding the school's money not part of that? I mean, is that not part of,
Yeah.
Yes.
it's not totally separate, right, okay.
Okay, Mrs.
They
Jordan?
go,
Please, go ahead.
Bob Brown, for example, goes out and he's gonna look at the internal accounts of a school and make sure that, all those transactions are handled appropriately.
Right.
I mean, it's right down to making sure that every ticket that is sold to a dance is
I know.
accounted for, so. And then we also use Mr. Brown and his team for our own internal audits, like just some examples recently. I've used him to do maintenance in the past, because I've gotten those issues
Right.
prior to, it was several years ago at this point, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I've used him in transportation, to go in, and if there were, as I recall, the one about transportation was a concern over inventory. So go take a look at this. And so that's all very helpful. But I would see that there would be some sharing of information, obviously, between the two teams.
Okay, we'll go to Ms. Jordan, and then Ms. Giovanelli. Yes,
The
ma'am.
only other thing because I look at 365 days a year. So what is this person doing for 365 days a year?
Well, they only work 255, so.
Okay, well, 255, whatever those days are.
Minus the days off.
So I'm looking at those days, and so there should be some sort of, in most of the places that I've spoken to as well, they have a plan put into place. And they also, when they have nothing to do, they were actually helping the districts with different types of fraud or, being there as well, but they still only answered to the board.
Okay.
Because that is a real concern to me, is what are they doing for all those
Yes.
days?
And I think some of that is going to get to our subsequent conversation around job description and some of that. So if we can put that just on ice for a moment, we're going to move to Ms. Giovanelli, and then I think I want to go back to question 1, because I think we've got consensus is what I'm hearing, but let's just check. Mrs. Giovanelli.
I think they'll be busier than you realize. But I think what Mary's thinking is, at some point, our auditor would want to audit Mr. Brown's books or oversee what Linda Doggett had already audited, and they would go back and check it. So I think that's where.
Well, right, that's what's in the
So I think,
statute.
yes, so I think that's what you're thinking, yes, then yes to that, you know what I mean? But, I mean, they obviously are not gonna do it 255 days, so, I mean, they'll do that, and then they'll be going on to something else and so forth,
Okay, so let me ask question number 1, because I think I'm hearing consensus around hiring an employee. Can we start there? Can I see a
Yes.
thumbs up? Hiring an employee that reports to the board, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we've answered number 1 and 2. Yes, yes. All right, so number 3, we've heard some conversation around the clerk's office, but I want to ask this question directly so we can make sure we have consensus. So should the board internal auditor retain the ability to contract with auditing and/or professional firms with the approval of the board to obtain services to accomplish the execution of audits as contained, and this is the key we were just talking about, as contained in the board-approved audit plan, which would discuss the scope of the type of work that that person's going to do. So question is, okay to contract, whether that's the clerk's office, with a firm, let's talk about that for a moment, and then I'll call for the question. Yes,
I
ma'am.
would suggest that we have them, give them the ability to contract and specifically name the clerk's office as their contractual. Because to me, otherwise, if it's, you can go out and find somebody to do this, that's a lot of time and energy and effort and additional cost, and then they have to come back to us and say, is this okay? We have to get approved, and it's just smoother to me to have the one source.
Okay. Any other conversation relative to firms or
I agree
otherwise?
with
Okay, Ms. Patrica?
I would just say that we would prefer it if they work with the clerk, because there's no guarantee that she's going to be able to produce the number of employees necessary to handle this function for us in a short period of time. So, and the other thing that I'll say is, in working with the clerk, time is of the essence. She needs to staff up if she's going to handle this for us. So in hiring an employee, I think that needs to be the first step, hiring an employee, getting a plan together with us, and being in communication with the clerk's office as we develop that plan, so that she knows who she needs to hire, because she needs time to get that done.
Okay, so I'm hearing a preference for the clerk's office, but understanding there may be some, we might need to work up to that. Okay, Ms.
And
Giovanelli?
I would agree, and I think there would be a contract, and it would be defined and laid out our expectations, and so it would definitely have to be a collaborative thing to be able to come to a good conclusion that the community would understand and accept and be comfortable and be transparent,
Okay. Other discussion?
I don't know if it's appropriate now,
Yes, please.
when we're talking about when, and I'm hearing that it may take a while or whatever.
That's the last question.
Yes, we're going there.
Okay.
Yep, we're heading there.
You're getting out
We're
of
heading there, absolutely. So what I'm hearing so far is preference for the clerk's office, with the understanding that there would need to be some communication with that office, okay? Mrs. Jordan?
Okay, I'm looking at the questions before I ask it. Money, what is this all costing too? So we need to know what that looks like.
Right, and that'll be some direction to HR, because they'll certainly need to look at the scope of the job and then get that back to you. Yes, ma'am.
Budget.
Yeah, it'll be budget.
Correct, in a budget, for sure.
Not this year, though.
Right, okay. All right, so let's look at question 3. So really what I'm hearing consensus around is we're looking at a preference for the use of the clerk's office with clear communication with that office that here's the scope of the work once we determine our audit plan, so that she has the opportunity to staff up. Should there be, now here's my question, should there be a need to go to a firm? Is that off the table?
No.
If we could, so where are we saying?
That's what I'm asking, right.
We can do this through the clerk's office, and she can assist us with this
To the extent that she
process
can,
and
right.
getting it done quickly and proficiently? Okay.
Yes, okay. Does that preclude the use, is my question. Does then that preclude the use of contracting with a consultant firm, should that not be available to us in the full nature that we need to fulfill our audit plan?
So the priority is the clerk's office.
Priority is the clerk's office, but is there,
Yeah. I don't
right,
like that
is
plan.
a firm.
Provider.
Provider, I like that, Mrs. Vaughn, very good. Okay, so let's look at, please. Yes,
Did the
ma'am.
state appropriate money for this?
No.
Oh, no, of course not.
Okay, so what so I'd like to see is,
spirit of
do we have consensus on the preference around the clerk of courts?
Yes.
With the understanding that we're not precluding the use of a firm should that need arise. Okay, so we have agreement on number 3. All right,
Because she'd get the board, or that person would get the board approved.
right.
Right.
Exactly,
Direction, yeah.
exactly. Okay, question 4. Does the board wish to continue the authority of the board internal auditor as described in the policy 1.17?
So just so the board knows, there's 5
Essentially, the authority is listed as 5 items. Try to summarize them. to conduct performance and financial audits of all departments, offices, activities, complete and have unrestricted access to all district records, which is required now under the statute. To request reasonable assistance from appropriate personnel in locating assets, obtaining records, information, unrestricted ability to interview employees, both written and oral, and sufficient clerical staff. So those are the,
I think the first item just needs to be changed to managing the process of, fill in the blank, what'd you say?
to conduct performance
Right.
and financial audits of all departments.
Managing the process, managing the plan put together by assisting the board in putting together that plan, whatever,
Okay.
because one person can't do all that.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about 1.17 as it pertains to the work? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, I was just wondering, Mr. Dodig, was Ms. Morgan able to speak to you at all about her thoughts on this?
No, not since our last workshop, but she did send all of us some comments last workshop, and I don't want to speak for her, but when we did a consensus to like number one, I think she was thumbs up last meeting, so, in-house.
All right, so any other comments on, thank you, any other comments on Board Policy 1.17 in terms of anything jumping out at you that needs to be changed? And of course, we'll work with Mr. Dodig and I and staff to make sure it's in alignment with the statute as well as the intentions that you've shared today. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Would the internal auditor get an assistant? I mean, like
Like a secretary,
yeah,
cleриcal
secretary, yeah.
assistance.
So
That's in,
who would they report to?
Okay, so that's a good question for the staff.
Who do our assistants currently report to? Linda Jo?
Yours do, yes.
Yeah, so that kind of makes sense to keep all of that uniform.
Mine reports to me, technically, I mean,
But,
so.
Okay, so,
and so that brings me to another question
okay,
though.
please, go ahead.
When I first started, I did the evaluations, but this past year I didn't do an evaluations for the secretaries. When did that change? How did I miss that?
It was emailed to all of us.
Yeah, no,
Oh, I missed it.
yeah, we send an email out to board members, and we ask for your input.
I missed it, I guess. I forgot.
Yeah, but that's our practice. We haven't stopped doing that. So like, we're coming up on the evaluation season again, so you can expect an email from our office that would provide, so you can provide feedback into that evaluation. And generally, there's consensus around some, and if there's not, then we will have individual conversations with you, and then we put it together.
Yeah, I think that kind of makes more sense.
Okay,
as we're
so
talking
the
about
question
this.
is there going to be clerical assistance for this auditor? Is that correct? And who will that be?
Yes, but I need to back up because, but I think if they're reporting to us, I mean, I don't know, I have a hard time, the loyalty would be to whoever paying, paying their paycheck. But I don't know.
like the board attorney
Yeah, I mean,
assistant reports to him. right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
to keep.
But he does, but he does
Would
her
report to
evaluation.
the-
Correct.
And so maybe that person would report to the auditor.
Right.
That's what I
That would
suspect.
be
Kind of
Yeah,
consistent.
that makes sense.
Okay,
Right.
so the clerical assistants would then report to the auditor. Okay. All right, so anything else in Board Policy 1.17 that you'd like to give direction to the staff as we're working through and making sure it's in compliance with the statute? Okay, so then we will work together and make sure we clean up any language that is inconsistent, and we'll bring that back to you for your review. Okay. Number 5, does the board, with the assistance of HR, wish to amend the current job description? So that was provided as backup. Is there anything that jumped out at you in the job description that needs to be refined? Yes, we'll go around the table, and we'll start with Mrs. Fisher.
Okay, the only thing that jumped out at me was days per year, and it says contract. So does that mean that it doesn't necessarily have to be 255, or it does, I mean, where it says here,
Yeah, because it's not on a salary schedule.
okay,
Yeah. But the superintendent and I, who are in similarly situated positions, work 255
okay,
days. Yeah.
okay,
Right,
okay.
but you have like a 3-year contract. Would this be a one-year contract or
I have a
3-year?
2-year, the superintendent, I think,
Oh,
has
okay.
3, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's up to you all to negotiate
Right.
with the
Yeah,
individual.
we would negotiate that with the
Mm,
auditor.
Could,
Yes.
working with the clerk's office, when we,
Contract?
I don't know, yeah, contracting through them, I guess I'm looking at when we don't need them, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. I really don't. So I wouldn't think what would they do in between, like you were asking. I think that we would have enough work for them to do, to keep them for 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Well, that's where the plan is.
Right, you have an audit plan, right, exactly. So let me just clarify, so when it says days per year, it does say contract on the job description. We just want to see, is that the consensus of the board to keep that as a contract?
Add 255 to.
The contract, my contract and the superintendent's both delineate that you work
Right.
255
That would
days.
be
Right, that's,
in the
yes,
contract.
absolutely. Okay, that would be a term of the contract, okay. Ms. Giovanelli?
Somewhere, I think they need to attend the oversight committee meetings. What do y'all think about that? And finance, I mean,
That's part of their plan. Whatever the plan is, we
Right.
dictate to them what we want them to do.
okay. Well, and that's what I
The
was
person who
asking.
works for us.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the job description.
Okay.
I think
I
the
just want-
important part of the job description is so you all know the qualifications for the individuals that you're going to interview and possibly hire.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, Dr. Pruitt's here to help, but
Are we going through
That would be in
the
the
whole
contract,
thing
you're
at once? I'm
So let's-
confused.
okay,
Or
so
are we
let-
going through it by function, qualifications?
Okay, let's do it, and let's do it in that manner. So
do you have
let's,
time to do that now, or do you want to have them send them
We can do that when
to
we do the plan.
Dr.
right.
Pruitt? I mean, that's up to
No,
you.
that's fine, that's
I
fine.
think the plan, Mary's right, I think the plan, we have to have a plan.
Okay, so do you want to, as Mr. Dodig recommended, do you want to send some input to?
This was a yes or no question.
Yes,
that I-
right, exactly, okay. So do you want to send us some input relative to the job description? Because I'm hearing there is a wish to amend some of the language, and naturally, we would want to do that because we have some direction in the statute.
Statute,
So
right.
we want to make sure that that is reflected
Right.
in the functions of this job description. So if the question is, do we want to amend it? I'm hearing the answer is yes. Does anybody object to amending in accordance with the statute?
Yes.
And would you also be open to sending us the information that you would like to see changed, and we'll go ahead and make those changes and then bring that back to you for your review?
Should we send it to?
In anticipation thereof, though, can we get a few model ones? Like what are
Yes.
considered to be the best job descriptions for
We
this
would be
position
happy to
across
provide
the
that.
state?
Yes, we
That would
can
be
do
great.
that. Absolutely.
I
Yes,
did,
sir.
I also emailed them to you before last briefing, so
Yep.
I can't judge whether they're good or bad.
Right.
No, I remember, now that you're saying that, I remember looking at those.
Okay, so we're making notes to provide those to you. And then our final question is if, by which date does the board desire to hire the board internal auditor? And we're keeping in mind that July 1 is our
Deadline?
deadline. That's right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I feel strongly about this, that especially the position we're in now, soon to not have a CFO, that we should move expeditiously with this position. So and especially because the end of March, then the end of June again, we get installments of the tax. And I think in the spirit of transparency, we should have as much of all of our stuff in play as we can. Since we're hiring a CFO, I would love to be able to see as soon as possible to have this position. I would not agree to waiting until July 1st. I think that's too late. And especially if we're using the clerk of courts, it makes it a little bit easier, not that they can do it tomorrow, but I think we need to kind of coordinate that, because whoever the new CFO is can work almost in tandem with the new auditor as well, and everything kind of moves in tandem at the same time.
Okay. Mrs. Vaughn?
Yeah, should we at least together look at the kind of qualifications in terms of education, experience? Because I see Angela sitting there, and we're going to have to come up with a figure that would be a fair figure, and I think she's leaving now. No.
Wouldn't that be?
How, yeah.
Part of the job description, I mean, the.
No, but I mean, in this minimum qualifications, if the person required a high school diploma, then we're going to think about paying at one
Yes,
level.
yes.
If the person requires a doctorate and 15 years' experience, obviously, I'm just saying those, it'd be different. So I'm just wondering what might be, what we're looking at, because we're going to have to start budgeting, and, I mean, all of this is going to have to move forward. So,
Okay, so Dr. Pruitt, please.
Well, I was going to say, and remember, we need a board-approved job description to advertise the position,
right,
so
but
there is
just
a
to
sense.
give us a
Yeah, I
little
mean, I
idea.
think in terms of the qualifications for the current description you have, you could start with that. One of the big issues is the credentials. Do you want them to be a CPA? Do you want them to have a certain certification? And those are the kinds of, when we looked at various job descriptions, those were some of the things that I saw variances in. So, that is, and we can turn around a draft to you pretty quickly once I have a direction.
okay.
So
Okay,
I can
I
do
see.
that, but I just, once I know.
Do you have any ballpark ideas, or not even?
Well, that one that we were using
Yeah, okay.
before, that would be the starting point, other than that one does not have the statutory, language. It isn't.
Right,
We
right.
didn't do that knowing this was coming. We said, well, we'll just wait and kind of do it all at
Yeah,
once.
for sure. And the other thing
no, I get
to
it.
go to that is yes, and we'll go there in just a moment. The other thing was the request relative to other districts and what they've done so far. So once you see those, that may start to get clarity around that particular job description. Once you see what 3 or 4 of the job descriptions look like in the larger districts, we may go from there. So we'll go to Ms. Giovanelli and then Mrs. Fisher.
Well, as far as salary, I think we need to know what market is.
Well, that's
I
fine.
had that, and I had sent that information. So I have all that, and I'm going to go ahead and resend it here, so you
Okay,
guys.
that's perfect.
Okay. And Mrs. Fisher, you had a question? Or a comment?
No, and the only comment I was going to have was, I'm sure that there are some examples of best practices, and I'm sure HR will provide us with that.
Mrs. Patrica?
Internal audit certification, similar to the CPA, but outside the CPA. I thought I remembered Paul Cohen telling me that.
Yes, there is. There's a CIA, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we want that as a,
Well, that's the feedback that I'll provide to Dr. Pruitt in my.
Generally, it's you say either or. They either be a CPA or have that certification.
okay.
All right, we have a couple of hands, so let me go back to Mrs. Gittens, and then we'll go back,
Whoever was next.
please.
I would like to put forward, Ms. Pruitt was saying that they could put it together fairly quickly. I would like to suggest that by February, geez, I'm going backwards.
I can't do that.
March, I know.
Back to the future.
You can do it. By our March 26th meeting, that we would be able to bring it forward for
Briefing.
So that deadline is passed, it would need to be a good cause item. I
No,
just
I
want
think
to.
she's talking about briefing.
Oh, just
No,
for
and that's
briefing?
fine.
Oh,
We could-
okay, all right, just for
We could bring
briefing.
it as good cause. I mean, would we have time to?
If you wouldn't have any significant changes, you could possibly bring it that evening, sure.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
But
I have a really hard time with that.
Because you're not going to all see
given our
each other's
protocols, right?
suggestions until that
And this
day.
is
Until the
Yeah.
briefing, yeah, so that's too short.
Then if it's the briefing, then we put it off for another month. I mean, it just,
meeting,
The next
theoretically.
meeting.
No,
right, which
Okay.
is April.
No, we have,
Okay, so today is March 14th, and typically for briefings, we need 3 business days, 3 to 5 business days for that. So that would be into next week. Yeah.
Right, and then you're saying that 30 days to
April.
advertise, so if we don't do something by the
minus-
26th to approve it, then it goes to the next meeting to approve, and then it's 30 days from that, and we're into almost May.
Right, that's why I sent you guys the project plan when we hired Rob, so you could just sort of see how the timeline is for these positions. You know, because 30 days, you got to give your ads time to work. Then, once the 30 days, and we can screen while the while the ads are coming in or the applicants are coming in, but you still need to wait to that, because some people will wait to the very last day because they may not want their employer to know that they're applying. So once we complete the screening, then because you may have out of county, out of state, you've got to allow to give them time to make the arrangements, and so, but that's why I sent you that, just so you could sort of see what the timeline looks like.
Okay.
So I agree with you, Ms. Gittens, the sooner we can get an approved job description, the better.
Because that starts your busy season. I mean, you're going to be hiring too, so you're just, yeah.
So we just need to do it and get out of the way.
Mrs. Jordan, please.
26 is a short meeting. Just remember that. We're coming in later on that day
I
for
don't
the
think we
workshop.
have a briefing, right?
We have a briefing that starts at 3:30 that day.
Okay.
Yes, as opposed to 2
The
PM.
Grand Dame.
Yes.
Just reference.
So let me ask a question of Dr. Pruitt. Do you feel like if we get, if the board provides you with feedback perhaps by Monday, would it be in enough time to be able to have that briefed by the 26th?
I'll turn it around
Okay.
within a few hours, so depending on what time
Fantastic.
that is, yeah, I can send a draft right back out to you, and then 24 hours for you guys to look at it one more time.
She
And then
can
the
do it
good,
in February.
and then the good news about briefing, right, is that you have opportunity for additional input if there's something else that jumps out at you, right? So would it be likely, would you all be in favor of moving it forward so that it comes for briefing on the 26th, knowing that you would still have some opportunity to refine, and then that would come forward at the following board meeting for job description approval?
So
Or we can
briefing
bring it to
26.
26th, and then first meeting of April would be the job description action.
Or we can bring it
So
for
we're gonna
good
send our
cause if we
input.
have,
I don't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, it seems like we're not going to have enough time at a briefing meeting to discuss all, I mean, there's a lot of points here in this.
but by that time, aren't we just refining and saying, yes, this
I don't know, I've got a lot of notes on mine, I'll bet we all
Well,
do.
But I think that there's going to be a lot of commonalities there, and I think that Dr. Pruitt in the past has put together a document that's
That'll be,
generally workable
Okay,
for the
okay.
group, and then the briefing is the time for us to.
Yes.
But the issue here, for me, with the timing of, we brief and vote on the same day, is that gives me no opportunity to gain community input. And
That's what I was gonna-
I need that time. I need that 2-week period of time to think about
We're looking
your
to-
feedback, your conversations, before I can act.
I didn't
on
think
that.
we were.
Verify, I think the
I believe
The
that's.
proposal was to brief on the 26th, and then to bring the job description forward for board approval at the first meeting in April. Did I hear that correctly?
Unless we were able to do good cause on the
On the
26th.
26th.
That's what
I'm
she
I'm
was-
very
Okay.
That's what-
concerned about it
I
waiting
agree.
for another 30 days. I really am. I think we're going to get a lot of questions from the community as we start to get the money in from the tax. And I think the more that we have already, in place and say, we're doing this, we're doing that, is going to make it
We have
smooth.
the oversight committee.
Right.
Well,
That's my-
Might I suggest calling I know Ms. Patrica said she wants the 2 weeks, so, but you could always call a special meeting.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
with 48
Just
hours
for that.
notice, so,
Okay,
in the in-between week, if you need to do
okay, then I'll buy that one.
Any other questions or discussion? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just in agreement with Chris on that we have to have the public
Yeah.
be able, they need to be able to understand and digest it. And they don't always watch 2 o'clock, and they don't come. So I think we need to allow for that. That's all.
Okay, Ms.
So,
Fisher?
yeah,
Thank you.
and so Dr. Pruitt, if we didn't call a special meeting and we went with our April 9th meeting,
for the vote.
is that enough time to advertise and hire at least by mid-June?
It's tight.
Just asking.
It's possible, it's possible.
So-
The quality of the candidates will dictate.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So then, let me ask this question, Mrs. Patrica, if we did call a special meeting somewhere between March 26th and April 9th, would that give you enough
Just need-
time?
I need just a few days.
Just a few days,
to
okay.
digest, reach out to people who are experts in this area, get their feedback.
When is the next finance meeting? That would be something that would,
April. Is it March? She's right.
what was the date?
The 20th.
That's a ways
20th.
up.
So it's March?
Oh, March 20th.
So
Oh,
it's
okay.
before.
Oh, that's
yeah,
good, that's good.
That's good.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so we're looking for a proposal. We're looking at March 26th as, well, let me back up. We're looking at providing feedback to Dr. Pruitt relative to job description by Monday.
Monday.
And Susan will be our friendly reminder on that. Yes, Susan? Thank you.
Which would be March 18th. We're looking at bringing it forward for briefing on March 26th. And so let me stop there for just a moment. Do we have agreement on those two items?
Yes.
Let me see thumbs. Okay. So now the next question is, when does it come forward for action, discussion?
Can we say a no later than, and then
Yep.
possibly call a special meeting if we're ready?
Well, you've said that only a couple of days after the 26th, so can we look at a
But I think
couple of
no later
days?
than gives
Yeah,
us
no later
flexibility.
than, because
April
we're going to
6th.
have to look at schedules and all of that good stuff.
Right.
I don't know if we can come up with an exact date, right?
Yeah, well, April 6th is our next action meeting, so
April 9th.
no later than April
No
9th.
later than April 9th.
Yeah.
Right. So you would have the week of April 1st, and then the 8th and the 9th, so.
And I know you don't want to overpromise, but I also have 100% confidence in your abilities to provide us with the best candidates from across the nation for our consideration for hiring.
Around the world.
Absolutely.
Given the rate of pay. that
She's
we-
got it
Absolutely.
covered.
And I just sent you the information that I had gathered, my staff had gathered. It includes job descriptions, an analysis of the pay and all of that, so for you to look at, okay?
Okay, so let's go around. We have some additional discussion. Ms. Skittens and then Ms.
Just the one
Giovanelli.
question, is it in your decision that you'll be working with the clerk's office as well? Because if she has possibilities perhaps of
People?
people that
Absolutely.
working together in tandem? with
Yes,
that. Okay.
absolutely. I will also prepare a project plan like you saw for the board attorney that I'll make sure that you get a copy of so that you can kind of keep on track with where we are in the process.
Thank you. Ms. Giovanelli, you had a comment?
So
Or
will you
question.
go through the process of collecting the applications and will you sort through and then provide, how will that roll out?
So you can tell me whether you want electronic or hard copy. And then what I do is provide, it'll be sort of be a double packet. There'll be those that meet the minimum qualifications that, you know, for review against a rubric that will be based on the approved job description, but also because I know sometimes people like to see, well, I just want to see everyone that applied. I'll make sure that you have access to those as well, just for review. So again, you'll just have to let me know in what format, because some people find it hard to, when there's a lot, to look through electronically. So we'll do, I'm looking, I don't see Trey in the room, so we do a binder that has the hard copies. So when my communication, I'll ask how you prefer to receive the information.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just want to make sure. Ms. Patrica.
I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
this gets into the next item on our agenda discussion
yes.
with regard to the
Yes.
staff attorney. I think that
Board attorney.
board attorney, sorry. I think that a uniform approach to hiring by the board might be good.
Yes.
And so I know that I sat in on a community interview process when we were hiring before I was a candidate, before I was on the board, when the district was hiring, I want to say it was a COO, I don't remember. But there were staff members and community members on that interview committee. And I look around this table, I could be wrong, but I don't see any experts in auditing here. So I'd like to have some kind of a community panel put together with experts in auditing that could help us vet these candidates for an internal auditor. And I'd like the same for the board attorney as well, because I have a law degree, but I tell you guys all the time, I'm not a lawyer. And that's true, because I am not connected to the legal community here in Fort Myers. In Lee County, I'm just not. That's not my job. So I think it's important for us to get people in here who know the legal community to help us vet our candidates.
Okay.
So I don't have an issue with interviewing people individually, but I think that group interview that we did with Attorney Dodig, in my estimation, was one of the less useful functions we've done as a board. I'd like to see that group interview done by people we identify as experts in those areas to help us make that decision. Does that make sense? Don't you guys use
In
a rubric
partnership
when
with
you
the
do
board,
that?
Ms. Patrica? In partnership with the board? In partnership with the board,
yes.
okay,
Like
one
the-
clarity.
The
Okay.
rubric
Yep.
that you guys use when you're hiring, I'd like to see something similar to that.
Okay. Okay.
But
Any
that's a
other-
crossover
Okay,
between agenda
yes,
items.
okay. So no problem. So we're going to put that on hold for just a moment. I just want to go back to question 6. So we know that we have a timeline for providing feedback to Dr. Pruitt relative to the job description. That will occur by Monday, this coming Monday. We know that we have a briefing date of March 26th. I just want to make sure we have consensus on the date by which we will approve the job description. And I heard a suggestion no later than April 9th,
Yes.
with the possibility of a special board meeting. Okay, can I see thumbs up for that? All right, so we have consensus on 6. All right. So there was a suggestion that was just made by Ms. Patrica relative to having the board as well as some community experts in the area of finance involved in screening and/or hiring. Discussion around that.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that. I just want a better picture of what that looks
Yeah, what's it?
looks like. Where do they sit? How do they, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, explain it a
through the
little more,
process
because
that-
I've never been in that
Yeah.
kind of interview.
Want to go through the process staff goes through when you're hiring a high-level employee at the district?
Ms. Dr. Pruitt.
Right, so there's how we did it with the board attorney, and then there is other high-level positions. But I'm going to kind of provide you, so the screening that we talked about, and then from there, I would take the feedback from all of you and provide you with who are your top 4 to 6 candidates, depending on if there's a real clear dividing line based on, sometimes okay, these 4 are good and nobody else is, or sometimes it's really tight, so you may want to interview 6. And from there, we put together a kind of a more than just an interview panel. What we like to do is provide, a writing a sample of some kind. We also ask for them to prepare a presentation for their 90-day entry plan and how they plan to begin their role. Relative to when it's sunshine, as these are, we did have, as Ms. Patrica talked about, we had board members around this table while we ask questions. I think, and I don't know what the legality would be, but in my view, I think it might be better if we either together or in 2 groups, so I don't know if that's possible, but would be to intermix some of these folks that have the experience with board members, and you would alternate asking those questions, and then at the end you could debrief and rank those candidates. So again, you can do it, I don't know, could they split up in 2 groups? Would that be, I'm just thinking it gets so large if we take.
As long as both groups are public, so I'm not quite sure how you would
That would be true.
manage that logistically.
Could you do in the morning one group and in the afternoon the other group? And that
Sure.
way the other
As
board
long as
members
they're
could be
both-
sitting.
As long as they're both advertised and,
Sure.
and
Okay.
in a workshop session, sure.
So then again, we could have, for example, 4 board members and maybe 3 community or experts panel and do some interviewing that are really specific to the job questions. And then in the afternoon, we could have other more general type questions and a review of their 90-day entry plan, and then questions that the people could ask. And again, it would be board members and then with some other folks.
I wouldn't, if you're going to split them up, I don't know why you wouldn't just have
That's the same.
board members at both sessions.
Yeah, that's what it,
Okay, that's
oh,
what you
yeah.
meant.
Well, because I didn't want, just in terms of asking the questions, if
No, I
you have
get it.
all 7 and then you have 7 more.
But
you
they
have-
could be there.
Oh, I would expect, I would want them to be there.
Yeah.
No, like, I would want you to be here, like, just, as part of it, just not like sitting up and asking the questions, because otherwise can be overwhelming, too.
Right.
I saw a couple of hands, so Ms.
As
Jordan?
you're screening.
Oh, please, go ahead.
You've checked out the references.
We do not.
Oh, you
Okay,
don't-
we do not. When
okay.
we do
When-
get down to the finals,
Okay.
we do a cursory look, we do the social media, we do the, sort of the background check without, it's not the official with fingerprints, but, so we could identify, well, yes, this person looks great on paper, but that's because they just got fired from such and such a county, right?
Great fiction writer.
Right. So, yeah, but we don't do that until we get down to that top list of folks, so.
And that's before or after the interview process?
We do that, we don't want you to be interviewing someone that you could put the name in Google and find out that they're.
Okay, good.
Okay, Ms. Jordan, you had a question?
Yeah, the only question that I had was, two questions, actually. I would love to be able to hear what other people's, what my other board members have to ask as well, because I may want that same answer. So to me, I love listening to what they have to offer.
yeah, we should
It's
all
really
be
important. And then, two, where do we pull those people from, the experts, which I think is a great idea, because we don't have all the answers. But where do they come from? Who goes out there and brings them to us, the experts?
So I don't know, sitting here today, in terms of these two I do have some for the school board attorney position. I think there's a resource through the organization, the school board organization, that I think I could do that. I'm guessing there's a similar organization that operates with auditors, so I would do that. And then Linda Doggett, I would speak with her and ask her who she would, if she would serve number one, and then who else she might recommend. So that is where I would start.
Thank you.
And maybe Finance Advisory could offer some suggestions as well.
Yes, ma'am.
The only thing I'd like, and are we just talking, are we on to the next agenda item?
We're almost there. I wanted to just clarify one thing with the board. I did not hear a date by which we want to have this hired. I heard a suggestion from Ms. Skittens about ASAP, but I did not hear, I don't know what the board's
What's
pleasure is on a date, what's realistic. I think we need to flesh that out so everybody's on the same page.
Because it's going to depend on, like she said, what's going to dictate is the applications.
Yes, correct. Okay. So thoughts on that, Dr. Pruitt, and then we'll go from there.
So I think June 1st would be aggressive, but I would be comfortable saying that.
Okay, so we're looking at June 1st. I want to just have a discussion around that. Yes, ma'am?
I'd like that to be a goal, but not a drop-dead date.
Okay.
Because if we put a drop-dead date, I'd rather go past July 1st, which is the statutory deadline, than get a bad one. So I think quality is more important than meeting the statutory deadline.
So a goal, the suggestion is a goal of June 1st, with the suggestion that if we do not have a robust applicant pool, that may take a little bit longer to make that happen.
We
So-
have specifically seen Dr. Atkins sit on a position waiting for the right applicant, and that applicant ends up being the hire that changes the direction of the district in a positive way.
I would
And
like
I think we should do the same thing.
to amend that to June 4th, because that's when the board meeting is.
Oh,
That
thank
way you could
Yes,
bring the
thank
name
you very
forward,
much.
sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so other discussion.
I'm good with that.
Sounds reasonable.
June 4th.
All right,
It's reasonable.
As
June
a
4th
goal.
as a goal. All right, can I see a thumbs up as a, June 4th as a goal? All right, thank you very much. I have everything I need. Is there anything else, Dr. Pruitt, that you need in terms of direction?
No, just, again, getting that feedback to me, so we can turn that job description around.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move on, I believe, to the
Yeah,
board
I
attorney.
think, it's the same kind of discussion we need to have relative to the school board attorney, other than there's two other things that I think I just, and that's why I provided you the information, again, that was presented, with the previous board, and that is the conversation around, do you want the structure to remain the same? Is it your interest to, because you do have options, relative, like you did with the auditor position, in terms of contracting out, hiring an individual, or changing the structure, possibly having a chief counsel and restructuring as we would potentially add. So I don't know if you had the time to review that information that was proposed. So I think I'd like to start there to see if there's thoughts, because that would be the first thing, is get a direction on, are we simply just keeping status quo and finding a replacement?
Are we addressing the Neola thing that's there yet, or no?
No.
I mean, that was on there. Okay, all right. Because I had a question about that, but I can do it
So
later.
it's again, just what is the board's direction on, is it the desire to continue the structure as is and begin a search for a school board attorney?
Mr. Dodig, do you see in your personal experience of what you've had to do, anything that you would change?
I will say this, I'm going to refrain from I could share those with you individually, but I will say a year ago, at this point in time, a year ago,
I advocated the plan that Dr. Pruitt has presented today, and it still has last year's date on it, I think, for a change in the way legal services are provided in the district. So, and I haven't changed my opinion in that respect.
May I also interject, and I would like to offer for the board's consideration, our staff attorney, Brian Williams, is here, and I thought it might be helpful to hear from our attorneys in terms of how they feel, because I think that's a very appropriate question. So with your indulgence, I can welcome him. All right. Thank you, sir.
And while he's coming up, can I ask a quick question? And thank you, Angela. In some districts, they have
Right.
to do the legal matters. Can you talk to that?
Yes, Madam Chair. Obviously, I came from Miami-Dade. They have a general counsel that reports directly to the board. They also have a deputy general counsel, or deputy assistant school board attorney, as they call it, and then assistant school board attorneys underneath that role by respective division. So you would have an assistant school board attorney that does ESC matters, an assistant school board attorney that does labor and employment, construction, you name it, charter schools. They have 16 attorneys in total. Broward has a...
16.
I know.
Whittle it down.
Palm Beach County actually has a similar model. They have, I believe, 13 attorneys and I think 4 deputies, and then they have school board attorneys by respective division.
Keep going.
Broward has less. I think they have about 8. But again, similar model. You know, I think Pinellas has 3. So,
Well,
Do they
maybe
have many trees
I'm not sure.
planted somewhere in the
A
district?
little bit more than we do. I mean, they do, because they're just the way the tax base
Right.
over there works.
right.
I think the key component here is the model of having a board attorney that reports directly to the board and then a separate attorney that reports to the superintendent. Again, in Miami, the general counsel reported to the board but served the district. So, and the attorneys underneath. Now, I recognize that there could be times where there's a conflict of interest between the board and the staff or superintendent. But I think in those instances, there's a way to address that, and I guess you kind of have to rely on the integrity of the individuals that's serving as your general counsel to identify the conflict and then determine the most appropriate way to resolve it. And I see that model. I think there's several districts that have that. So Broward and Palm Beach, for example,
So
have
if
those.
you were given your ultimate goal, what would that look like?
Again, I'll just say this, and I think Mr. Dodick will agree that I think on the staff attorney side, there is a need for resources to support the district. Again, you know, I love what I do and I love working in all the areas, but obviously having someone support there, I'll tell you, for example, ESC is a very important issue to our district, and there are quite a few issues involved with ESC. Oftentimes I'm asked to attend IEPs. We have situations where we may seek due process with DOA with respect to a placement. And again, these can be very convoluted and very specific issues that require, you know, keeping up to speed with what's going on in that particular area. Labor employment is an area in and of itself. You have DOA hearings. For example, I had a 3-day DOA hearing on an employee termination issue. Have a PERC hearing and arbitration that's coming up in May. These are all issues that require dedicated time to, look at the issue in addition to all the other functions. Our district had, I believe, to date has had 80 Derrick hearings, which is our student appeal hearings for student discipline. To date, we've had 50 predetermination hearings for employee discipline. So that's just to give you an idea of the type of things that are consistently going on weekly. I think we're averaging now 7 Derrick hearings a week, which is student discipline, which is kind of pretty high.
And I've spoken to the superintendent many times about this, about when we do lose a position, especially at this level, it's an opportunity to step back and look at what we're doing and maybe reorganize or rethink it to make it better going on in the future. So that's why I'm bringing it up. Yes, Ms. You had a comment?
Well, I was waiting for you to finish. Okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So then I wanted to thank Dr. Pruitt for the proposals that are in our backup material. For instance, proposal for fiscal year 19, chief counsel, legal assistant, deputy counsel, academics, deputy counsel, operations and finance, and a secretary. So that makes a lot of sense. I remember a time when we had 3 attorneys here, and I think that the workload wasn't what you just described. So I hope that we can take a look at these proposals and have that discussion and entertain a legal team as we move forward with.
I'm wondering about the cost. We do have an outstanding request for a cost-benefit analysis of what we're paying for outside counsel now versus what it would cost to bring somebody on board. So I feel like any kind of a decision is way premature until we know what this is going to cost.
Right, and I just said we need the conversation.
Do you hire outside counsel?
I don't. I believe it goes through the school board attorney.
Well,
But do you hire outside counsel to assist with his work or just with your work?
well, yes and no.
I mean, there are cases that begin and commence in the staff attorney's office, and the staff attorney provides representation at the administrative level. But if it ends up becoming a lawsuit, a civil suit in court, typically at that point, we retain counsel through our third-party insurer, Johns Eastern. So, but a case, I mean, having done that job for 13 years, the work on the case up until that point is all done through the staff attorney's office. But to answer your, to take it a little further, anything involving personal injury, workers' compensation, areas that Miami-Dade does in-house, which I'm not suggesting 14 attorneys is logical. I'm just saying those things are referred out. Yes.
The other thing that just, you think about the workload piece, something that has recently happened, and you just talk to some of our principals. I was talking to some high school principals just this morning, and they have said that literally in the past, few months, predominantly because of this vaping issue that has just taken on a life of its own, and there's all little nuances about it that make it very different than the old-fashioned, marijuana in the school. I was, one principal said that's an easy issue to deal with, drug dogs and things like that, and we can deal with that. This is much more difficult to detect, so you've seen a spike in referrals and Derrick hearings that he has to contend with over and above what we've had in the past. So discipline has been on the rise predominantly because of this particular issue. There are others, but this has had a big impact, as has the threats with the anniversary of Parkland and all that in a different way. In addition to that, we just passed a referendum. We're in a growth model that we have not been in years. So we have all these contracts that are flying back and forth. We are attempting to buy property. We are attempting to sell property. So all these transactions that were not here just a very short time ago. So in the space of very few months, we've seen even the already heavy workload of that office go to this whole other level. The other piece is just the whole working relationship part of it. This is, I think, probably a pretty I mean, we've got, I think, what, the Pinellas model might be similar, but other than that, that's the only one. This is has a very strange feel to it, and particularly, when we went through our January timeframe, I'll leave it at that, it gets to be very strained. And, I think that if I look at the old model that took place when Rob was in Human Resources and Keith was here, I mean, honestly, I will say that, Dr. Browder probably used Keith as his, quote, attorney, you know what I mean? And then Rob was truly staff attorney, in terms of the work that he did. Now I think it's even more isolated. I don't really, go to Rob because I've tried to respect that very strong division between the staff attorney and the board attorney that had been built toward the end of Mr. Martin's time in office, so to speak. And since actually Dr. Browder left, that relationship between the superintendent and the board attorney just really didn't exist, in terms of a legal relationship, and that's the way it is, right now. So this is a very isolated position, so to speak, and that is just something that probably, in my personal opinion, and it's just my opinion, but it's probably not the best model because, 9 times out of 10, this is a team that works together, so you don't have that. And if you do have an issue between the superintendent and the board, there are options that you can do. I mean, you can go with a chief counsel, and they can, if not comfortable with the chief counsel dealing with that with the superintendent, I've seen this board go out and get outside legal counsel to come in and work. If the board has an issue with the superintendent or another staff member, that's what I've seen them do in the past. So just my thoughts about it.
I kind of have 2 questions. One, when you did the proposals on page 4, is this considering that the chief counsel is also the board attorney and not?
Yes.
Okay. And when you did these proposals, like out for F-19, F-20, was finance at all a consideration, or was just this purely a operational type?
A little bit of both. I mean, it started out as the operational, but Mr. Martin did do an analysis of all the funds that have been spent on outside attorneys, and I'm not sure if you have that or.
Yeah, in fact, I sent it to
so,
the board.
okay, so, and so that was part of the assessment, and the timeline was because of the money that were spending on outside counsel.
So, I mean, please go
Well,
ahead.
no, so then the other people under the chief counsel would work with assist Brian?
Well,
Both.
he would become one of those, yeah.
Yeah, theoretically, I mean, he would sort of be the lead of those, and he would then help direct that work. But, that's a decision that could be made about the structure.
So can I put out the question so that we're all on the same page? Are we looking at, one, hiring another Mr. Dodig, as is, pretty much, or 2, taking the opportunity to look at a different structure?
That is correct. I believe that is the first decision that needs to be made. And I will say to you that, because I know, like with the auditor in terms of timeline, there's no way we're going to hire if we just kept everything the same. There was no way we can hire a school board attorney before he leaves. So, my understanding is you're probably going to have to hire an outside firm to assist you in the interim. So you could extend that time while we make the determination about how we're going to structure that and the funding implications of that, and you know what I mean, like so those things could be discussed.
So, how's your writing skills on a flip chart? You want to?
I'm not good.
Okay, so one thing is, the overall thing is that we won't get this done for quite a while. And so we're looking at an interim.
Well, you won't get it done before he leaves.
Right.
In any scenario, so.
And like Chris had said about the other, I'm sorry, Ms. Patrica had said about the other position, and especially in this, we want to get the best possible person in this position.
Right, and the best structure.
And the best structure. So what kind of timeline are we looking at, team, to get this done? When do we want to make the decision, A, to keep the structure the same, to change the structure to what we see before us, and what kind of a...
So my recommendation, again, looking at our time here, that we only have about 5 minutes left, would be for you all to sort of review the information that was provided, and then also the financial information that, and what outside counsel we use and how that's structured. And then we could put it on the agenda for a briefing meeting here in the near future for you then to have the discussion and potentially make a decision.
The cost of outside counsel, I need to be able to compare that to the cost of bringing that counsel in-house.
Right.
Okay. Because the cost of outside counsel by itself is useless to me. I'd also like for you, maybe I can get with the superintendent and I can have a conversation with Attorney Williams about this. I have concerns about a chief counsel functioning as counsel to the board and the superintendent. I have problems in my mind because sometimes our interests are separate. So how, you said that sometimes there are conflicts, how are those handled? And that doesn't have to go now because we literally have 4 minutes left. But if I could have a conversation with him at some point, I would appreciate that.
I would share that as we currently are structured and as we currently, how the attorneys are used, I don't see that working.
Right.
If I could I will say that having done both jobs, there are inequities. I'm mirroring what Dr. Atkins is saying. There really is. There truly is.
Yeah.
And to whom would the chief counsel report?
To the board. I believe the
The
model.
chief counsel reports.
Well, we provide, it's done both ways, so that would be a decision point.
Okay, and Ms. Juvenilli, and then we'll kind of...
I don't have anything other than I want to remind, because y'all weren't here, that we had like one candidate last time. And it took, and she advertised twice, right? You went back out twice. Went out once and then went out again, just, right? Something like that, something.
For the board attorney? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Extended it, maybe.
Well,
That's- okay, yeah, I'm sorry, there's just so many, I can't remember.
No, I understand. I remember it was few applicants and we extended it or something. I knew something.
Okay.
So I just want to let people know that.
Okay.
Was that because the candidates needed to be familiar with Florida statute? Florida school statute? What
Certified.
do you attribute the lack of candidates for this job that everyone wants?
Oh, they do?
I don't recall that it was a lack of candidates. I think we just wanted to make sure that we had a real robust pool of candidates for the board's consideration.
And I would say, and just candidly, Mr. Dodick is well-known around the state. And I think that board and staff attorneys around the state knew that and felt, this is a person who...
That's right.
One just pulled.
Right, there were two that I spoke with, thank you, that said, that's Mr. Dodick's job.
Right, they
So,
pulled, right.
That's right, thank you, I forgot about that.
Yeah, he reminded me, that reminded me
Okay,
too.
for sake of time, I'm sorry. So our next steps on this piece, can we ask you then to, maybe in the process we used with the other one, give us whatever questions we need to
Yes.
answer?
For a briefing.
For the briefing, and then you get us all the information, and
Okay.
we do our homework, and we can say maybe for the briefing at the 26th, is that too soon for you?
Not for me,
I mean, just to get the
Yeah.
information prior to that.
yeah, the only thing I'm not sure of is what was provided relative to the financial and
I can send that to you.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So are we all in agreement then on the 26th? Prior to, we will look at the information from HR and have the briefing of it on the 26th.
I guess the only other question I would have is what needs to be involved with legal assistance for the board after you leave, and how is that decision going to be made? Because I don't want you to run out of time.
Well, a couple of things, and Brian and I have had these conversations. I mean, the first thing is you all need to have an attorney that can sit with you on the first meeting after I leave at the board meeting. So, because the board attorney serves as a parliamentarian. So I think that's the primary concern. Of course, there's the daily work of the office, which is relative to reviewing contracts and the other aspects of the job. And that is something that is urgent, but probably not as urgent as having someone to sit with the board at a board meeting. So, but I respect the need for all of you to get legal advice also. So I think you have to think about that. That doesn't mean if you hire a firm for a short period of time that a lawyer in that firm can't help you with that. But I will tell you this. This is a very specific area of the law. Education law is, and there's 50 of us board certified around the state. So but that doesn't mean you can't have a local government attorney that's done this work outside for other boards come in and serve the board as a parliamentarian. They may not be able to answer a question about FERPA or the law relative to IDEA or the areas that are the expertise of a lawyer that practices education law. So recognizing that, that's why you're going to come up with a model that you want to use and hire people internally. But I think outside, your initial concern is on, I don't know what the first board meeting in May is, but you need to have someone sit as the parliamentarian. I mean, that's,
And one of the things that I had concern about on the job description was in minimum requirements we had on the Florida whatever. And
board certified.
Or eligible for certification. I personally would like to see that removed. I think we need to get someone who's ready to hit the ground running, especially if we're going to have a break anyway, that when we do get someone, they need to be on spot.
So what we could do is, as part of the briefing, is review that job description, because what I do recall is that there was much debate about that very issue. Okay. So we can certainly continue that conversation at the briefing.
If I could just add something to that, I can tell you in the 8 months I've known Brian, he's an outstanding lawyer. He's not board certified in education law. So
no,
you may be eliminating some capable people if you require it. So, and being eligible to take the test just means you're admitted in Florida and you can eventually take it. So,
well, it also
we
means
can
you have a certain number of years of experience in education law, doesn't it?
well, you have to get certain credits, which Brian's working on, to apply, yes.
All right.
I know we need to wrap this up and move on. I have one thing that I would, any other things on this issue? For sake of time, are we moving into
Yes.
his office for the next session? I would like to pass this out to everyone. Here's some copies. And I have a suggestion, we can discuss it later, but I think we really need to talk about our way of work, and this gives you an idea of that. My suggestion, and we had talked before about the fact that every 2 years, we have the potential of the storming that we go through. And thank you, Brian. And one of the ways to, I'm passing somebody else to need one. One of the ways to stop that is that when someone new comes in, they have a place to fit in and things to do. Using the strategic plan, and you can look over this and we can look at it later, but using the strategic plan, we would sit down probably with Denise and Cindy, and I'm going to discuss this with the superintendent and Denise as to the particulars, but basically using the strategic plan as our alignment. And when someone comes in, there's an example there of the strategic plan, looking at that and seeing where's my expertise, where would I like to work, what would I like to do? And we would provide you as well kind of a outline or a bucket, let's say, that if this is the area of the strategic plan that you're looking at, these are the areas and the people in the community and in the district that you would work with. And I believe that it would allow everybody to feel coming in that they have a part of working on the board. So I'm asking you to take a look at it, send me comments, and then we can bring it up at a good of the order or whatever for another meeting. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for everybody.
Will we send you the comments, or will we send them to the board attorney in the interest of, if we're
They're
gonna make
saying
any
they can't send me
decisions?
the comments, they have to send it to you?
I'm
Or
asking.
the superintendent.
Or,
Okay.
okay, let's,
You should not, here's what you should not do. You should not have dialogue.
Right.
On email. It's not a public meeting.
Right.
So,
Similarly, I need to give,
send it to Dr. Carlin? Is that all right?
and just don't search.
We will discuss whatever.
one other piece on that same exact issue. When you send Dr. Pruitt your
Information about the board auditor job description, please don't copy your colleagues. Just send it directly to her.
Right.
Oh, I was gonna call him and talk to him and say like, hey, how are you gonna vote? And then try to get all of them to vote my way.
counselor, I gave you the advice.
Sorry, that's a joke. Sorry, that's a joke.
Thank you, Mrs. Gittens.
Yes. See what I started?
Is that it? Are we
Okay.
good?
We're ready to start the next session.
Angela, is Mitchell an accountant?
Yeah.